The apple pie was still warm when June carried it back into our dark house and locked the door. My 16-year-old had just been turned away from my parents' Christmas table while I worked a double shift in the ER. They kept the photographer, the glossy book, and the place card removed for her. They sent my daughter home alone. At dawn, I found her asleep in her sweater, her phone open to one photograph. I wrote a letter instead of storming their house. By the time they found it, the word room would no longer belong to them. I hope you are doing well tonight. Stay with me to the end and subscribe so you do not miss what happened after that door closed. I arrived at Street Luke's emergency department at 2:40 on Christmas Eve, 20 minutes early for a shift that would not end until 7 the next morning. 16 hours sounded unreasonable when I said it out loud, so I had stopped saying it out loud. The first half ran from 3 in the afternoon until 11 at night. The second began the moment the first ended. I had agreed to the extra 8 hours 3 days earlier, after 2 nurses called out and our supervisor sent a message asking whether anyone could cover the holiday gap. June had been sitting across from me at the kitchen table when I received it. "You should take it," she had said. I looked up from my phone. "You don't have to make that decision for me." "I'm not. I'm saying Grandma already invited me. I'll be there until you get home." She had smiled when she said it, but there was something careful in the way she kept smoothing the edge of the napkin beside her plate. I should have asked why. Instead, I saw a 16-year-old trying to reassure her widowed mother and mistook it for maturity. My husband, Michael, had been gone 7 years. Since his death, I had become good at arranging life in boxes. Work in one box, bills in another. Grief in a box I opened only when June was asleep. My parents belonged in the box-marked family, which meant I trusted them even when they made that trust difficult. At 2:55, I stood at the nurse's station tying my hair back, while monitors chimed behind me and a paramedic rolled through the doors with an elderly man clutching his chest. My phone vibrated. It was a message from my mother. "Dinner at 7. Tell June not to be late." I stared at it for a second, then sent a thumbs up and forwarded the message to June. She replied almost immediately, "Leaving around 6:30. Pie is nearly done." I smiled despite the noise around me. My mother had told her not to bring anything, but June had spent the afternoon making an apple pie from Margaret's recipe. She had even called me from the grocery store because she could not remember whether her grandmother used nutmeg. "She uses too much," I had told her. June had laughed. "That wasn't the question. Half a teaspoon." "Thank you. And don't let her tell you the crust is too thick." "She always tells me the crust is too thick." "Then tell her your mother said she can bake the next one herself." June had gone quiet for a beat. Then she said, "Is Aunt Tessa going to be there?" I had been rinsing a coffee mug and almost missed the change in her voice. "Yes. Your grandparents said everyone would be there." "Oh. What does that mean?" "Nothing. June. I just don't want to wear something she'll make fun of." I leaned against the counter. "Tessa jokes too much. That doesn't mean you need to change what you wear." "She doesn't joke with Maeve like that." I should have stayed with that sentence. I should have asked June to give me examples. Instead, I reached for the explanation that required the least from me. "You and Tessa have different personalities. Don't let one comment ruin Christmas." June did not argue. That was the part I would remember later. She did not argue, because I had already taught her what happened when she tried. At 3:10, an ambulance brought in a 17-year-old boy who had slipped on ice and struck his head. His father was driving down from Two Harbors, and the boy kept asking whether someone had called him. "Yes," I told him while checking his pupils. "He knows where you are. He said he'd be here. He said he was on his way." The boy nodded, but his fingers kept twisting the edge of the blanket. I stayed beside him longer than I needed to. I told myself it was because his blood pressure had not settled. The truth was that I knew the look on his face. It was the look of someone trying not to ask the same question twice, because he was afraid the answer might change. At 4:30, I checked my phone and found a picture from June. The pie sat on the cooling rack, its crust uneven around one side. Beside it was a rectangular gift wrapped in dark blue paper. For Grandpa, she had written, "What is it? Poems." The old collection he said he lost. Where did you find it? Used bookstore near school. Don't tell him, I promise. She sent a heart. I put my phone away and returned to work. At 5:40, the waiting room filled with coughs, falls, kitchen cuts, and one child who had pushed a bead into her nose. Christmas Eve in the ER was rarely peaceful. People hurried because they wanted to get home, and that hurry brought them to us. At 6:12, I stepped into the medication room and called June. She answered on the second ring. Are you dressed? Yes. What did you choose? The red sweater. The one Tessa said made you look 12? There was a pause. I like it. Then wear it. I am. I could hear cabinet doors closing behind her. Do you have the pie? Yes. The gift? Yes. Phone charged? 93%. Roads look all right? I checked. Main streets are clear. The forecast called for light snow and temperatures around 18 degrees. The city crews had treated the roads all afternoon. June had held her provisional license since May and had driven to my parents' house many times. Nothing about the trip seemed dangerous. That fact would not make what happened acceptable. It would only remove the excuse my family later tried to use, that they had believed she was perfectly capable of taking care of herself. You can call me at any time, I said. I know. Even if I'm busy. I know, Mom. Even if it feels small. She sighed softly. Go save people. I'm trying. I love you. I love you too. That was the last time I heard her voice before she reached my parents' house. What happened there was something June told me in pieces after my shift. Maeve later confirmed the details she had witnessed, and the photograph on June's phone filled in the one part neither girl had understood that night. At 6:25, 25 minutes before June arrived, my sister Tessa brought a publicist named Dana Cho and a photographer into my parents' dining room. The visit had not been part of the Christmas plan. Dana had called Tessa that afternoon because the photographer was passing through Duluth and the publisher wanted profile images ready for its January catalog. Tessa accepted the one available slot rather than ask for another date. Tessa had recently finished a memoir called Making Room. I did not know that yet. June did not know it either. My parents did. The photographer began setting up lights beside the table while Dana arranged several glossy advance copies near Tessa's place. One of those books was placed where June's name card had been. June had been invited weeks earlier. My mother had confirmed the invitation again that afternoon. But once the photographer arrived, no one called June and told her the plans had changed. They simply decided what they would do when she reached the door. June pulled into my parents' driveway at 6:55. She carried the pie in both hands and tucked Colin's gift beneath one arm. The porch light was on. Music played inside. Through the front window, she could see my mother's Christmas dishes, wine glasses, camera equipment, and Tessa standing near the head of the table. June told me later that she noticed the book before she noticed the people. Its cover showed Tessa in a cream blouse, smiling toward something outside the frame. The title was printed in large white letters, Making Room. Beneath it was a line June could not read clearly from the porch. She rang the bell. My mother opened the door but did not step aside. Hi, Grandma, June said. Margaret looked at the pie, then back over her shoulder. What are you doing here? June laughed because she thought it was a joke. You told Mom dinner was at 7. Behind Margaret, Tessa appeared in the hallway. She wore a fitted blue dress and had already had her hair styled for the photographs. June could see the edge of one lighting stand behind her. Tessa looked at my daughter, then at my mother. You didn't call her? Margaret lowered her voice. There wasn't time. June shifted the pie against her palms. Call me about what? Tessa stepped closer but stayed inside. This turned into a professional dinner. It's Christmas. We know what day it is. June looked past them toward the dining room. Her name card sat on the narrow console near the wall. The place where it had been was occupied by a stack of books and a black camera bag. The closet beside the hallway stood partly open. Inside was a folded metal chair. June saw it. My mother saw her see it. There is no room for you at the table, Margaret said. Those were the exact words. Not the table is crowded. Not give us a minute. Not let me find another chair. There is no room for you. June looked at Tessa. Can't I wait in the living room until they finish? Tessa's expression tightened. This is an important night for me. We can do Christmas with you another day. You invited me. Mom invited you before this came together. June's eyes returned to the books. What is that? Tessa moved slightly, blocking her view. Nothing you need to worry about tonight. One of the advance copies had been turned, so the back cover faced the hall. A sentence was printed near the top in italics. June could only see part of it, but she recognized the rhythm. She had written those words before. Not in a social media post, not in a card for Tessa, in a school assignment based on a page from her private journal. She tried to lean far enough to read the rest. Tessa stepped directly into the doorway. June, please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Maeve appeared behind her mother. She was 13, still wearing the velvet dress Margaret had bought her for dinner. According to June, Maeve started to move forward, but Tessa put one hand on her shoulder. Go back inside, she told her. June turned to my father. Colin stood near the dining room entrance with his hands in his pockets. She held out the wrapped gift. I brought this for you. He looked at it but did not take it. The temperature's dropping, he said. You should drive home before the roads get worse. The roads are fine. Then you'll get home safely. There were at least 4 adults in that house. My mother, my father, my sister, and Marcus, Tessa's husband. Any one of them could have offered to drive behind June. Any one of them could have called me. Any one of them could have carried the pie inside, moved the camera bag, unfolded the chair, or stopped the photographer for 10 minutes. None of them did. June looked at her grandmother one last time. Does Mom know? Margaret answered too quickly. Your mother is working. We are not disturbing her over seating arrangements. That sentence gave June the final reason she needed not to call me. My family knew exactly which part of her to use. They used her fear of becoming a burden. They used her pride in my work. They used every lesson I had accidentally taught her about staying quiet, while adults handled important things. June backed away from the door. The pie was still in her hands. She returned to her car, placed it on the passenger seat, and laid Colin's unopened gift beside it. No one followed her to the driveway. No one watched until she pulled away. No one called me. She drove home in 18 minutes. At 7:24, after parking in our driveway, she sent me the message I read during my next break. Plans changed. I'm home. I'm safe. I called immediately. June answered, but her voice sounded flat. What changed? They have people over. You were supposed to be one of the people over. It's fine. June, what happened? I'll explain when you get home. Did Grandma ask you to leave? A silence passed between us. I'm already home. I looked through the medication room window. 2 nurses were moving between rooms. An ambulance crew had just entered through the bay doors. Do you want me to call Mrs. Brennan and ask her to come over? Our neighbor lived 3 houses away and had known June since elementary school. No, you shouldn't be alone on Christmas Eve. I'm 16, Mom. That is not what I asked. I don't want anyone to see me right now. Her voice cracked on the last word. I closed my eyes. I can ask my supervisor again. And then what? Someone else worked 16 hours because I couldn't handle dinner? This is not your responsibility. Neither are those patients, but they still need you. I pressed my palm against the counter. Lock the doors. They're locked. Turn on the porch light. I will. Keep your phone with you. I am. I love you. I love you too. The call ended. I went to my supervisor and asked whether anyone could take over long enough for me to drive home. She checked the board, called the staffing office, and shook her head. We had no safe replacement. Leaving without a handoff would not just cost me my job. It would abandon patients whose care had already been assigned to me. So I stayed. At the time, I believed my daughter was upset because a family dinner had changed at the last minute. I did not yet know she had been stopped at the door. I did not know my mother had looked at her and said there was no room. I did not know my father had sent her back to her car without taking the gift she had searched weeks to find. And I did not know that the glossy book sitting in June's place contained words my daughter had written when she was 12 years old. All I knew was that June had gone quiet. I had spent years teaching myself to hear alarms through closed doors, crowded hallways, and the noise of frightened people. But that night, the most important warning in my life arrived in 4 small words on my phone. Plans changed. I'm home. At 9 o'clock, I stepped into the staff lounge with a paper cup of coffee. I had no intention of drinking and called June again. She answered quickly. Did you turn on the porch light? Yes. Did you eat? A little. What did you have? A little pie. I looked at the clock over the sink. The one you brought home? Yes. How much? 2 bites. Her answers were becoming smaller. June, I can call Mrs. Brennan. No, she can sit with you until I get home. I don't want her to see me. I understood. She did not want our neighbor, who had known her since elementary school, to see that she had been sent home on Christmas Eve. You shouldn't have to be alone because someone embarrassed you. I'm not alone. I'm talking to you. I'm inside an emergency room. You're still talking to me. At the nurse's station outside, a call bell sounded twice. Did Grandma tell you to leave? I asked. June was silent long enough that I thought the call had dropped. She said there wasn't room. At the table? Yes. There are 8 chairs at that table. I know. And the folding chairs. I know, Mom. Who was there? Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Tessa, Uncle Marcus, Maven. 2 people I didn't know. What people? A woman and a man with a camera. Why was there a camera? I don't know. Tessa said it was a professional dinner. On Christmas Eve? I guess. Her breath caught. Mom, please don't call them right now. They sent you home. You're at work. If you call, Grandma will call me. Then Tessa will say I distracted you while you were taking care of patients. That is not your fault. I know. She said it too quickly. A nurse opened the lounge door and signaled that I was needed. I have to go, but I'm calling again on my next break. Okay. If you want Mrs. Brennan, text me 1 word. Just yes. I will. And eat something that isn't the pie, she promised. She did not. For the next 2 hours, I moved from room to room, while the conversation replayed in my head. My parents hosted Christmas the same way every year. There were always too many plates, and at least 1 folding chair pulled from the hallway closet. The idea that there had been no room was ridiculous. The idea that my mother had said it to June was worse. At 10:16, I texted Margaret. Why did June leave? She answered 7 minutes later. She became uncomfortable when she saw we had guests and chose to go home. We did not want to distract you during your shift. My mother made it sound as though June had arrived, seen strangers, and left because she was shy. Before I replied, another patient arrived. When I checked my phone again, Tessa had messaged me. Tonight got complicated. June misunderstood. We'll explain after the holiday. Please focus on work. Their stories did not match. Margaret said June chose to leave. Tessa said she misunderstood. Neither said they had tried to stop her. Neither asked whether she had arrived home safely. I took screenshots. I was not building a case. I only knew my family was changing the language before I had heard the whole story. At 11, the second half of my double shift began. Shortly after midnight, I called June. She did not answer. My pulse climbed so quickly that I nearly dropped the phone. On the second call, she picked up. "Sorry, I was in my room. What were you doing?" "Looking for something." "What?" "My blue journal. From 7th grade. June had kept journals since she was 11. She stored them in a wooden box beneath her desk and treated that box with a privacy I had always respected. "Why are you looking for it tonight?" "Because Maeve sent me a picture." "What picture?" "The table." "Send it to me." "Not right now." "June, I need to look at it again first." There was fear in her voice, sharper than the hurt I had heard earlier. "You don't have to send it until you're ready," I said. "Tell me what you can." "The picture shows the book." "What about it?" "There's a sentence on the back. I think I wrote it." "Where?" "In a school assignment. It came from my journal." The staff phone rang beside me. "Is the journal missing?" "I can't find it." I almost said maybe it was somewhere else. I had used that word against her too many times. "Maybe you misunderstood. Maybe Tessa meant something else." "Don't call Tessa," I said. "Don't sign anything if anyone sends you something." "Why would they send me something?" "I don't know. I'm being careful." The staff phone rang again. "Send the photo when you're ready." "I will." The photograph reached me at 12:43. Maeve had taken it from the hallway before the photographer began. The dining table filled most of the frame. Tessa sat near the head. My parents stood behind her. Marcus looked down at his phone. Glossy books had been spread across the table. June's place card was not in front of a plate. It sat on the narrow console against the wall. A black camera bag occupied the chair where she normally sat. I zoomed in. The title was clear: Making Room. Beneath it was Tessa's name. On the back cover, printed above her photograph, was a line in italics. I learned to sit so quietly that even fear forgot I was there. I stopped breathing. I had heard that sentence before. Years earlier, June had read part of a school assignment aloud at our kitchen table. The line had frightened me. I had asked whether she wanted to explain it. She had shaken her head. I had let her stop there. My phone vibrated. "I found the box," June wrote. "The blue journal isn't in it." I looked from the message to the photograph. The camera bag in June's chair. Her place card pushed aside. My sister's book using words my daughter had written about being afraid. For the first time, I understood why Tessa had not wanted June inside. I did not yet know how much of the book belonged to her. At 1:15, I called Margaret. "This is not a good time," she said over music and voices. "You told June there was no room." "I told you she was uncomfortable." "That isn't what she said." "Elena, your daughter arrived during a professional commitment Tessa could not cancel. Then why didn't anyone call her before she drove there?" "We were handling several things." "Why didn't you let her wait in the living room?" "Because she was already upset." "She became upset after you sent her away." Margaret exhaled slowly. "You are exhausted. We can discuss this when you've slept." "What is making room?" The noise behind her seemed to recede. "It's Tessa's book." "Why is a sentence June wrote printed on the back?" My mother did not answer. "Margaret, you should speak to Tessa about her creative process." "My daughter's private writing is not Tessa's creative process." "You don't know what permissions were given." "What permissions?" "I'm not discussing contracts at 1 in the morning." The line went dead. My mother had not denied it. She had not asked which sentence I meant. She had gone directly to permissions. 8 minutes later, Tessa texted, "Stop interrogating Mom. You don't have the context." June knew I was writing about our family. I typed, "Did she give you her journal?" 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. "We will talk after Christmas," she wrote. I took another screenshot. By 2 in the morning, my body felt heavy, but my thoughts had become painfully clear. June had been invited. A professional shoot had appeared. My family had chosen not to warn her. They had removed her place card, put a camera bag in her chair, and sent her away before she could look closely at a book using her words. While she sat alone in our house, they were already rewriting what had happened. I asked staffing again at 2:30. My supervisor checked the board, called 2 people, and returned with the same answer. There was no qualified replacement. "If something is wrong at home, go," she said. "We'll document it." Leaving without a safe handoff would divide my patients among nurses already carrying too much. It would create another emergency without solving the one waiting for me. I called June. She answered sleepily. "Are you in bed?" "On the sofa." "Why?" "I didn't want to go upstairs." "Do you want me to stay on the phone?" "For a minute." So I stayed. She listened to the hospital doors open and close behind me. I listened to the low television and her breathing. After a while, she said, "Mom?" "Yes?" "If the words are mine, can she use them because she's family?" "I don't know everything she used yet. But being family does not make your private words hers." "Okay. Did Grandma ever have your journals?" "When the roof leaked." She kept the box for a while. Our roof had been repaired 2 summers earlier. My parents had stored several boxes while the upstairs rooms were covered in plastic. "Did all the journals come back?" "I thought so." "Did Grandpa ever scan them?" "He offered to scan some poems." "Did you agree to the journals?" "No." I rested my forehead against the wall. "Stop searching tonight. We'll go through everything together." "Okay. I'm sorry you're alone. You didn't send me home." The words did not comfort me. At 7:12, I completed handoff. I changed out of my hospital shoes and drove home through streets washed pale by the early light. The porch lamp was still on. The pie sat on the kitchen counter with one narrow slice missing. Colin's gift lay beside it, still wrapped. I found June asleep on the sofa in the red sweater she had worn to my parents' house. Her knees were drawn toward her chest. Her phone rested open against the cushion, the photograph still on the screen. I sat beside her. "June." Her eyes opened slowly. "You're home." "I'm home." She pushed herself upright. "You should sleep. So should you." I waited until she was fully awake. "Tell me what happened from the moment you reached the door." She did. I did not interrupt except to ask what she had actually seen and what she had assumed. I asked who spoke, where everyone stood, whether anyone offered to drive her home, and whether she heard Tessa mention the book. June told me about the folding chair in the closet. She told me Margaret blocked the doorway. She told me Colin looked at the gift, but did not take it. She told me Tessa stepped in front of the books when June tried to read the cover. Then she showed me Maeve's photograph again. We enlarged the back cover together. The sentence was clear. I learned to sit so quietly that even fear forgot I was there. June went upstairs and returned with her laptop. She searched an old school folder, then stopped. "I don't know if it's still here. We don't have to find it this minute." "I want to." The file itself was gone from the laptop, but she found an email thread from 7th grade. The attachment was titled "The Hallway Light." June did not open it yet. She looked at me. "I tried to tell you I didn't like when Aunt Tessa used things I said." "When?" "After the podcast." "What podcast?" "The one where she read that paragraph about being invisible. She told me it came from an anonymous listener." "I know. Was it yours?" June nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I did." The memory returned. June had said the paragraph sounded like her. I had told her people sometimes wrote similar things when they were sad. I had not asked Tessa. I had chosen the explanation that kept the family quiet. June pulled the wooden journal box from beneath her desk and set it between us. The books were arranged by year. There was a gap between 2020 and 2022. "The blue one was here," she said. "Who had access?" You, Grandma, Grandpa, when they stored it. Anyone else? Aunt Tessa came over when Grandma kept the boxes. June closed the lid. I wanted to promise I would fix everything, stop the book, and force my family to admit what they had done. But promises made before understanding the truth were another way adults took control. So I asked, "What do you want me to do first?" "Believe me before they explain it away." "I do." She studied my face as if testing whether the answer would hold. Then she opened the email from 7th grade. The attachment appeared on the screen. The sentence from the back of Tessa's book sat halfway down the first page. June pointed to it. "Mom, they didn't just take my place." Her finger moved beneath the sentence. "They took my words." For several seconds, I could not look away from the sentence on June's screen. I learned to sit so quietly that even fear forgot I was there. The words belonged to my daughter. I remembered hearing them in our kitchen 4 years earlier, when she had read part of a school assignment aloud and then closed her laptop before I could ask another question. Now, they were printed beneath my sister's photograph. My first instinct was to grab my coat, drive to my parents' house, and demand every journal, file, and explanation they had. June must have seen the decision form on my face. "Please don't go there," she said. "They sent you home so you wouldn't see that book." "I know. They used something you wrote." "I know. And now they're sitting there pretending this was about a chair." "I know, Mom." Her voice sharpened on the last word. I stopped reaching for my keys. June folded her arms across her chest. "If you go over there yelling, Grandma will cry, Aunt Tessa will say you're jealous, and Grandpa will tell everyone you scared them on Christmas morning." "I don't care what they tell everyone." "I do." I stared at her. She looked exhausted, but there was nothing uncertain in her expression. "They'll make me the reason you lost control," she said. "I don't want to be that again." Again! The word landed harder than anything my mother had said through the phone. I sat back down. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to know what they used before they explain it away." "All right. And don't send them everything." "I won't." "You always say that when you're angry." "I'm not sending anything without asking you." June studied me for a moment. Then she turned the laptop back toward us. The email thread came from December 2021. The subject line read, "7th grade writing portfolio." Beneath it was the original attachment June had sent to her English teacher, followed by a reply, praising the imagery and asking whether she wanted to submit the piece to the school literary magazine. June had declined. The hallway light was 4 pages long. She scrolled slowly. The first page described a dark house, a flashlight with weak batteries, and the sound of wind pressing against the windows. Halfway down the second page was the sentence printed on Tessa's book. "I learned to sit so quietly that even fear forgot I was there." The surrounding paragraph made my stomach tighten. June had written about listening for a car that never turned into the driveway. She had described how the cold seemed to enter the house one room at a time. I wanted to keep reading. June placed her hand over the trackpad. "That's enough." I moved my hands away. "Okay. I don't want them reading the whole thing." "They won't. I don't want the publisher reading it either. We can use only what is necessary." "Do we have to send any of it?" "No." She looked surprised. "If you don't want to do this, I will not send your writing." "But then Tessa keeps using it." "We can ask questions without attaching the whole piece." "What if they don't believe us?" That question sounded too familiar. I had spent years teaching June that belief came after proof. If she said Tessa had embarrassed her, I asked what exact words had been used. If she said Margaret treated Maeve differently, I asked whether there might have been another explanation. I had called it fairness. To June, it must have felt like an interrogation she had to pass before her feelings became real. "I believe you," I said. She looked back at the screen. "I know the sentence is mine." "That is enough for me." "It might not be enough for them." Then you decide what they see. We copied one page from the PDF into a separate file. The page included the sentence from the book, but not the most private sections of the assignment. June read it twice before nodding. That page. Only this? Yes. I saved it under a new name and closed the original. The advance copy in Maeve's photograph showed the publisher's logo near the bottom. North Shore House was a small independent press based in Minneapolis. Their website listed a general contact address, the editor responsible for memoir, and a separate email for rights and permissions questions. I read the addresses aloud. To June. "Which one?" she asked. "All three." "Will that look dramatic?" "It will look like I want the correct person to see it." I began typing. The first version sounded like a furious mother. My sister stole my daughter's private journal. I deleted it. We did not yet know exactly what Tessa had taken, who had given it to her, or how much appeared in the book. Rage did not give me permission to claim facts we had not confirmed. I started again. Urgent rights and permissions dispute involving a minor's unpublished writing. I wrote that I was Elena Ward, the sole legal guardian of 16-year-old June Ward. I identified Making Room by title and author. I explained that an advance copy photographed on Christmas Eve contained language identical to June's unpublished school writing. June leaned over my shoulder. "Don't say they stole the whole journal." "I didn't." "You were going to." "I wanted to." "That's different." "It needs to stay different," I continued. June had not given permission for her school assignment or journals to be used in a memoir, audiobook, or marketing campaign. If the publisher had received a document suggesting otherwise, we disputed that interpretation and requested a temporary internal hold while the source and permission were reviewed. I did not call it a legal notice. I did not threaten a lawsuit. I did not claim June owned every memory connected to our family. I attached Maeve's photograph, the single page June had approved, and the header of the original school email showing the date and teacher's reply. Then I asked June to write 3 sentences in her own words. She opened a blank document. "My name is June Ward. I wrote the attached page in December 2021 when I was 12. I did not give Tessa Mercer permission to use this writing in Making Room, and I did not know the book contained my words until Christmas Eve 2025. June read it aloud. "Do you want to say more?" I asked. "No." "Do you want to remove anything?" "No." "Are you sure you want me to send it?" She looked toward the wooden journal box. "Yes." I attached her statement. The clock on the laptop showed 8:43 a.m. My finger rested over the trackpad. June asked, "Will they tell Aunt Tessa?" "Probably." "Before she can call me?" "I don't know." June reached for her phone and turned it off. "Send it." I clicked. The email left at 8:45. Within seconds, an automatic response appeared. North Shore House offices were closed for the holiday and would reopen Monday, December 29. Urgent rights matters would be reviewed after staff returned. June read the message. "So nothing happens today." "Not at the publisher." "What happens here?" I looked toward the front door. "That depends on what we let happen." My parents still had the keypad code to our house. They had used it when June was younger, when Michael died and I could barely remember to buy groceries, and later when my roof was being repaired. For years, I had treated their access as proof that we were close. That morning, it felt like a door I had forgotten to close. I opened the security application on my phone and changed the code. June watched me. "Grandma will notice." "She should." "Are you cutting them off?" "I'm stopping them from walking into our house without permission." "That's not the same thing." "No." I wanted her to understand the difference, because I was learning it myself. A boundary was not the same as revenge. A closed door was not the same as cruelty. I took a sheet of stationery from the kitchen drawer. "What are you writing?" June asked. "A letter." "Why not text them?" "Because I want them to read the same words. I don't want 6 separate arguments. I wrote the date at the top. Mo and Dad. Last night, you told June there was no room for her at your Christmas table. At the same time, a book using her unpublished words was sitting in the place where her name card should have been. This morning, with June's permission, I sent a rights and permissions complaint to North Shore House. We asked the publisher to pause the project while it verifies the source of June's writing and the scope of any permission it believes it has. You are not to contact June privately about the book or ask her to sign anything. Any request must be sent in writing so June and I can review it together. I have also changed the access code to our home. Do not come here without an invitation. Elena. I read the letter to June. She pointed to the second paragraph. Can they say I made you send it? They can say anything. Should we write that it was my choice? We already told the publisher that. I want them to know. I added one sentence. June chose the material that was sent and asked me to submit the complaint. I read the full letter again. June nodded. No insults? She asked. No. No, you'll regret this? No. That won't sound like you when you're mad. That is the point. For the first time that morning, the corner of her mouth moved. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it inside a plastic document sleeve to protect it from snow. I'm coming with you, June said. No. Her face closed. Why not? Because you were awake all night. Because I don't know who is still at that house. And because I'm not putting you back on their porch. You said you weren't deciding for me. You're right. I stopped. Do you want to come? June considered it. Then she looked at the sofa. No. Do you want me to wait? No, I want it there before they start calling everyone. I put on my coat. Keep the door locked. You changed the code. They still have keys. June's eyes widened. I had forgotten the physical spare Margaret kept. Changing the keypad would not stop the old physical key, so I told June to fasten the interior security latch after I stepped outside. I also scheduled a locksmith to rekey the exterior lock on the next business morning. Then I called Mrs. Brennan. This time, June did not object. I told our neighbor I needed to leave for less than an hour and asked whether she could stay in her own house, but keep her phone close. I did not explain the family conflict. Mrs. Brennan agreed. June stood at the door while I put on my boots. Don't ring the bell, she said. I won't. Don't talk to them. I won't. Even if they see you. I held her gaze. I'm leaving the letter. That's all. The drive took 18 minutes. Duluth looked washed clean and exhausted. Snow had collected along the curbs, but the main roads were clear. Christmas lights still glowed against the pale morning. My parents' house appeared at the end of the block. Tessa's car was still in the driveway. So was Marcus's. Dana and the photographer were gone. I parked across the street and sat for a moment with the engine running. I imagined knocking. I imagined Margaret opening the door and immediately turning my anger into evidence that I was unstable. I imagined Tessa crying. I imagined Colin saying I had frightened everyone over a misunderstanding. June had predicted every scene. I turned off the engine and crossed the street. The front step was clear, except for a thin line of snow along the edge. For one wild second, I wanted to open the storm door and place the envelope inside, where Margaret could not pretend she had missed it. I did not touch the handle. I set the protected envelope against the center of the door, beneath the brass knocker. Then I walked away. No one opened the door. No one called my name. At 9:49, I pulled away from the curb. I returned home at 10:08. June sat at the kitchen table with a blanket around her shoulders. Did anyone see you? No. You left it? Yes. She looked at the clock. How long before they find it? I took off my coat. I don't know. My phone rang before I reached the sink. Margaret. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Then Tessa called. Then Colin. The screen lit up 3 more times while June and I watched. At 10:15, the first voicemail appeared. I pressed play on speaker. My mother's voice came through so loudly that I pulled the phone away. "What did you send them?" There was movement behind her. Then Tessa shouting something I could not understand. Margaret continued. "You had no right to interfere with your sister's contract without speaking to us. Call me immediately." The message ended. The second voicemail came from Tessa. "You are destroying years of work because June got upset about a dinner arrangement. This book is not about stealing anything. You don't understand the permissions, the process, or what this project means. Call me before you make this worse." Not once did she say she was sorry. Not once did she ask whether June was all right. Colin's voicemail was shorter. "What exactly did June give you? Call me before you send anything else." June looked at me. "Why does he care what I gave you?" "I don't know." Another message appeared from Margaret. "June already gave permission last year. Ask her before you accuse your family of theft." June read the text twice. "I didn't give permission for a book. Did you sign anything last year?" She frowned. "For the podcast." "What exactly did it say?" "I don't remember." Neither did I. Tessa had brought a release form to our kitchen in 2024. She had said she wanted to use a short, anonymous passage from one of June's school assignments in a podcast episode about teenagers and grief. I had read it. At least, I believed I had. June had signed after I signed. My mother called again. I turned the phone face down. June pulled her laptop toward her. "We need to find that form." "Yes. What if they changed what it meant? Then we find the original. What if we can't? We look before we assume." June glanced at me. It was a small glance, but I understood it. That was what I had always said to her. Look before we assume. Find proof. Give adults the benefit of the doubt. This time the doubt belonged to my family. The proof belonged to June. My parents had found the letter and started screaming because I had acted before asking their permission. But beneath their outrage was something else. They were not asking what sentence had been used. They were not asking whether June had written it. They were asking what she had given me and which permission we remembered. They already knew there was something to defend. And for the first time in my life, I was not going to let them explain it before we saw the page ourselves. The release form was buried in an email thread from March 2024. June found the message first. She typed Tessa's name into the search bar, then narrowed the results to attachments. 6 files appeared. 3 were birthday photographs. 1 was a podcast logo. 1 was an invitation to Maeve's school play. And the last was a PDF titled Family Story Release. June clicked it. The first page opened at the signature section. My name appeared above the date. June's name appeared beneath mine. For one terrible second, I understood exactly what my mother had meant. June had signed something. I had signed it too. She looked at me. "Did we give her permission?" "I don't know yet." "You signed it. So did you." "I was 15. I was 41. I scrolled to the top. The document was 3 pages long. Tessa had brought it to our kitchen almost 2 years earlier, along with 2 cups of hot chocolate and a practiced smile. She had said she wanted to read a short passage from one of June's school assignments during an episode about teenagers and grief. I remembered asking whether June's full name would be used. Tessa had said no. I remembered asking whether the passage would be changed. She had said only enough to protect privacy. I remembered signing because June wanted to hear her writing read aloud. What I had not remembered was the exact title of the piece. The Hallway Light. June leaned closer. "Keep reading." The first paragraph identified one specific podcast mention. The second allowed Tessa to use no more than 100 words from the school assignment. It allowed June's first name, but not her last name, photograph, or school. The next section stated that permission applied only to that episode and promotional clips directly connected to it. Nothing in the document mentioned a memoir. Nothing mentioned a printed book, audiobook, or marketing campaign. Nothing gave Tessa access to journals. Nothing allowed her to use the rest of June's writing. June traced one line with her finger. It says 100 words. Yes. How many did she use in the book? We don't know. Did this letter keep my writing forever? No. You're sure? This gave her permission for one episode. June sat back. The relief on her face lasted only a moment. She still had that paragraph. Yes. And she could have used it to find more. I returned to the email. The message from Tessa said, "Attached is the simple release we discussed for the March episode. It covers a short excerpt from June's piece and the use of her first name. Nothing beyond the podcast." I read the last sentence aloud. June stared at the screen. She wrote that. Yes. So she knows. She knew what she asked us to sign. Then why did Grandma say, "I already gave permission"? Because she either never read the whole document or she is hoping we didn't keep it. The words sounded harsher than anything I had ever said about my mother in front of June. She did not defend Margaret. Neither did I. June opened the attached audio link from the old email. The podcast episode was still online. Tessa's voice filled the kitchen. She introduced the segment by saying she had received permission from a young family member to share a piece about grief and isolation. She read 86 words from June's assignment. The passage ended before the sentence printed on the back of Making Room. Tessa had not used that sentence in the podcast. She had used different lines. June paused the recording. So the book has something she never had permission to use. Yes. Unless Grandma gave her the journal. Or Grandpa scanned it. The words hung between us. June closed the audio player. I told you after this episode that it felt strange. I remember. You said Aunt Tessa had changed enough of it. I did. You said I should be proud she thought my writing could help people. I said that too. June's voice remained calm. That made it harder to hear. I didn't want to help people like that. I felt the apology rise too quickly. I'm sorry. For what part? The question stopped me. For assuming that because you signed the form, you were comfortable with everything that happened after. That's not the only part. No, I forced myself not to defend the version of me who had believed she was supporting June. I'm sorry I treated your discomfort like something you needed to explain better. June looked away. I'm sorry I trusted Tessa's description of the release more than I trusted the way you reacted after the episode. She folded the edge of the blanket around her knees. I don't know if I believe you'll stop doing that. I wanted to tell her I had already changed the door code, sent the complaint, and put a letter on my parents' porch. Those were actions. They were not proof that I had changed the way I listened. You don't have to believe it yet, I said. That answer seemed to surprise both of us. My phone had collected 14 missed calls since Margaret found the letter. I silenced it again and forwarded the original 2024 email thread to a new folder. Then, I sent a short follow-up to North Shore House. I attached the complete release and Tessa's original message limiting its scope to a single podcast episode. I did not add accusations. I wrote that the attached documents clarified why we disputed any claim that the release covered the memoir. The automatic holiday response returned again. No one at the publisher had seen it yet. Nothing had been stopped by a judge, lawyer, or court. There was only a complaint waiting in an inbox and a family already panicking over what that inbox might reveal. The day after Christmas passed in fragments. Margaret called from different numbers when I stopped answering hers. Tessa sent long messages, accusing me of misunderstanding creative nonfiction. Colin left one voicemail saying there were technical explanations for the files, but refusing to provide them in writing. I replied to none of them. At noon, my Aunt Patricia called. I don't know what happened at dinner, she began. Then why are you calling? Your mother is devastated. Did she tell you June was sent home? She said June chose not to participate in a professional event. She was invited to Christmas dinner. You know how hard Tessa has worked. I looked across the room at June. She sat at the dining table with headphones on, but the screen in front of her was dark. What does Tessa's work have to do with whether a 16-year-old was allowed inside her grandparents' house? Patricia lowered her voice. Elena, family stories belong to everyone in the family. Events can be remembered by everyone. June's sentences belong to June. I'm not trying to argue law. Neither am I. Then what are you trying to do? Make sure my daughter is not treated like a resource. Patricia sighed. Your mother says Tessa changed names. That does not answer anything. She says the book could help people. I ended the call. June removed one earbud. Was that Aunt Patricia? Yes. Does she think I'm selfish? She thinks what your grandmother told her to think. That isn't an answer. No. She did not call to ask what happened to you. She called because your grandmother was upset. June put the earbud back in. That afternoon, Tessa sent me an email instead of a text. The subject line read, "Context you refuse to hear." I opened it because June was beside me, and because I had promised not to hide information that concerned her. Elena, you are making serious accusations based on a photograph and one sentence. Making Room is a memoir, not a reproduction of June's journal. Memories overlap. Language evolves. Family members influence one another. The book has gone through professional review. The publisher has seen the release. I did not hide June's involvement. I am attaching the chapter you seem determined to misunderstand. Read it before you destroy something that could help thousands of families. Tessa. A PDF was attached. The night I brought her home. June saw the title before I could close the screen. What night? I don't know. Yes, you do. Her voice changed. I looked at her. The power outage, she said. I did remember that night, or at least the version I had been given. December 2021. A heavy snowstorm. I had been called into work for several hours. Tessa had stayed with June. Later, the power went out, and my parents helped until it returned. That was what I believed had happened. I had never heard it called the night Tessa brought June home. June stood so quickly that the chair scraped the floor. Do not open it. I won't. Not without me. I said I won't. I mean when I'm asleep too. I understand. Her face had gone pale. I closed the email without downloading the attachment. Tessa also sent a new document, I said. What document? I returned to the message. Beneath the chapter attachment was another PDF titled Updated Contributor Authorization. The preview showed several pages of dense language and signature lines for both June and me. She wants us to sign something new. Because the old one doesn't cover the book. That is what it looks like. June crossed her arms. Then why did Grandma say I already gave permission? Because they want that to be true. My mother called again before dinner. This time, June asked me to answer. I put the phone on speaker. Margaret began before I said hello. You need to withdraw that complaint before Monday. Why Monday? Because offices reopen. That is when they can finally review it. Elena, your sister has spent a year building this project. June has spent 4 years believing her private writing was private. No one published her journal. Advance copies already contain her words. Then where did the sentence on the book come from? Tessa was part of the family during that time. That is not an answer. You are choosing the most hostile possible interpretation. I am asking how she got the words. Margaret paused. Colin preserved some family materials when your roof was being repaired. June looked at me. What materials? I asked. Things that might otherwise have been lost. Did he scan June's journals? You should be grateful your father cared enough to preserve them. That was not permission. June left them in our house. Because I asked you to store boxes during construction. And they were returned. One is missing. Margaret's breath caught so faintly that I almost missed it. Then her voice hardened. You cannot expect us to remember every notebook your daughter has misplaced. Tessa remembers enough to print June's sentences. This conversation is going nowhere. You called me. I called because you are about to embarrass your sister in front of professionals over a misunderstanding. No. I sent private documents to a publisher, asking it to verify permission. Do you hear yourself? You sound like a stranger. June leaned toward the phone. Grandma. The line went quiet. June, Margaret said, suddenly soft. Sweetheart, adults are trying to solve this. I am the person you wrote about. You have not even read the chapter. You didn't let me see the book. That was because the timing was wrong. You told me there was no room. Margaret's gentleness disappeared. We were under pressure. Your mother is turning an unfortunate seating issue into something ugly. June closed her eyes. I ended the call. For a few seconds, the room was silent. Then June said, "She did it again." What? She made the door sound like an accident. I had no argument. We left Tessa's chapter unopened for 2 days. June needed time, and I was determined not to turn urgency into another way of taking control from her. On December 27th, Tessa sent a second email. She wrote that she had attached the chapter because it proved she had transformed June's language, and because June was not named as the narrator. She repeated that non-fiction writers routinely combined memories. Then she asked us to sign the updated release. The new document did not merely approve one chapter. It granted permission to use June's name, likeness, personal history, written materials and recorded statements in the book, audiobook, advertising, and future adaptations. It stated that June had voluntarily supplied journals and family writings for publication. June read that sentence twice. I never supplied anything. I know. Why would they write that? Because if we sign it, they can say it was true. Can they change the wording after? We do not sign inaccurate documents with a promise they will be fixed later. June closed the file. For the first time, she did not ask whether refusing would hurt Tessa. She only said, "I'm not signing that." On Sunday evening, my mother sent a final message. You are tearing this family apart over language. I did not respond. At 9:12 Monday morning, December 29th, my phone rang from a Minneapolis number. I answered in the kitchen while June stood a few feet away. This is Elena Ward. Miss Ward, my name is Celeste Park. I'm the editor responsible for Making Room at North Shore House. Her voice was calm and careful. I received your complaint this morning. Our rights and permissions manager is reviewing the material you sent. Has the book already gone to print? Advance copies have been produced. The final print run has not begun. June gripped the edge of the counter. Celeste continued. We have placed an internal hold on production and promotional activity while we clarify the source material and permissions. Does that mean the book is canceled? No. The answer came immediately. It means the project will not move forward internally until we complete an initial review. We have not reached any conclusion about the dispute. That was exactly what should have happened. No dramatic ruling. No stranger declaring my family guilty. Only a pause and questions that Tessa had expected no one to ask. Celeste requested the complete 2024 release, the original email thread, the page from June's assignment, and a list identifying specific disputed passages. We will not provide the full assignment, I said. We are not asking for material unrelated to the disputed language. I need June to approve everything first. I understand. June stepped closer. Can she hear me? She whispered. I told Celeste June was beside me. June, Celeste said, you do not need to speak today. You can choose whether you want to provide a statement later. June looked at me before answering. I already wrote one. I have it, Celeste said. Thank you. Celeste explained that the publisher would also ask Tessa for her source list, the complete permission documents, and an explanation of how the disputed language entered the manuscript. She did not promise a result. She did not ask us to trust her. She told us what would happen next. After the call, June stood very still. They believe me? They believe there is enough to review. That isn't the same. No. She nodded slowly. But they didn't call me confused. No. They didn't say I was overreacting. No. They asked where the words came from. Yes. That seemed to matter more to her than the production hold. I forwarded Celeste the full release and Tessa's 2024 email. June approved the single page from her school assignment again. Then, we sat together in front of the unopened chapter. The title remained at the top of the screen. The Night I Brought Her Home. June placed one hand over mine before I touched the trackpad. If we read this, she said, you might find out something you should have known before. I looked at her. Then I should hear it from you, not from Tessa. June shook her head. No. Read what she wrote first. Why? Because I need you to see how easy it is for them to make the wrong version sound beautiful. She released my hand. I downloaded the chapter. The first page appeared. At the top, beneath the title, Tessa had placed an epigraph. It was another sentence June had written when she was 12. The sentence beneath the chapter title was one June had written when she was 12. I waited for headlights that never came, until the dark began to feel like the only honest thing in the house. June did not move beside me. I read it again, hoping repetition would somehow make it less familiar. It did not. That is yours, I said. Yes. Was it in the school assignment? No, it was only in the journal. The room seemed to narrow around us. Until that moment, we had one sentence on the back of an advance copy and several lines from a school file. Those words could be traced through an email, a teacher's response, and the limited release Tessa had asked us to sign. This sentence had never left June's private notebook, at least not with her permission. Do you want to stop? I asked. No. You don't have to prove anything to me. I know. She pulled the laptop closer. I need you to read what she made it into. The chapter began with Tessa describing a December storm 4 years earlier. Some details were accurate. Heavy snow had begun before sunset. The wind had rattled the upstairs windows. I had been called into the hospital after another nurse's child became ill. Then the story shifted. Tessa wrote that I had left in such a hurry that I barely noticed June's fear. According to the chapter, June had hidden behind silence while I focused on work. Tessa claimed she recognized what no one else could see and promised to remain beside her. I stopped reading. I did ask if you wanted me to stay home. June's eyes remained on the screen. You asked once. You said you would be okay with Tessa. I thought I would. The distinction mattered. I had not abandoned June without asking, but I had accepted the answer that made it possible for me to go. I continued. In Tessa's version, she stayed through the first hours of the storm. When the electricity failed, she drove through dangerous roads to buy batteries, blankets, and food. She returned to find June sitting in the hallway, too frightened to move. The chapter described Tessa kneeling in front of her, wrapping her in a coat and saying she would never have to wait alone again. My sister made the scene beautiful. The light from her flashlight became a symbol of trust. The cold hallway became the place where June finally allowed someone into her private world. Tessa wrote that she carried my daughter into the living room and stayed awake until morning. I looked at June. Did any of that happen? No. Did she go out for batteries? She went to a party. The answer came without hesitation. What party? I don't know whose. She was dressed up when you left. I searched my memory. Tessa had arrived wearing jeans, boots, and a long gray coat. I remembered asking whether she had plans later. She had told me she had canceled them because family came first. She told me she canceled. She didn't. June turned the laptop away from us. She waited until your car was gone. Then she said her friend's birthday dinner would only last an hour. You were 12. I told her I didn't want to stay alone. What did she say? That I was old enough to watch television without someone holding my hand. My fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Why didn't you call me? I tried. I stared at her. My phone never rang. I used my phone. Tessa took it before the call connected and canceled it. How do you know it never connected? She showed me the screen. Then she said the hospital would send you home if I created a problem. I could hear Tessa's voice saying it. Not because June imitated her, but because those were exactly the words my sister used when she wanted selfishness to sound responsible. June opened the chapter again and scrolled farther. Tessa had written that she returned before the worst of the storm. She described finding the power out, June frightened, and the road behind her nearly impassable. What actually happened? I asked. The lights went out after she left. How long were you alone? I don't know. An hour? Longer. 2? June rubbed her palms against her jeans. The microwave clock said 6:40 when she left. Grandpa came after 10. I did the calculation without wanting to. More than 3 hours. A 12-year-old alone during a snowstorm. In a house without power. Waiting for an adult who had promised to return. Did you call Tessa? A lot. She didn't answer? Once. What did she say? That she couldn't hear me and would call back. Did she? No. June had not raised her voice. She had not cried. She spoke with the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed the story silently for years. What did you do when the power went out? I got the flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The red one? Yes. The batteries were weak. June looked at me. That was in my assignment. I remembered the paragraph. The beam had faded each time she turned the flashlight toward the stairs. She had written that darkness seemed to follow the light instead of retreating from it. What happened next? I sat in the upstairs hallway because it was warmer than downstairs. Why didn't you call a neighbor? Tessa said not to tell anyone she left. Why? She said people would misunderstand and you would get in trouble at work. I had believed for years that June did not remember much of that night. The truth was that she remembered everything. She had simply been told the consequences of speaking would belong to her. How did Grandpa know to come? I called Grandma. What did you tell her? That the power was out and Tessa wasn't home. What did she say? June's expression changed. Not much, but enough. She told me to stop crying first. I looked down at my hands. Then what? She asked how long Tessa had been gone. I told her. Grandma said not to call you because you were helping sick people. Of course she did. She said Grandpa would come. Colin had arrived after 10. That part matched the family story. My father had told me he went over when the power failed because Tessa was having trouble with the circuit box. What did Grandpa find when he got there? Me in the hallway. Was Tessa back? No. Did he call her? Yes. What did he say? He told her to get home before you found out. I stood and walked to the sink because I could no longer sit beside the screen. Outside the window, the snowbanks along the driveway had turned gray at the edges. A city plow passed, scraping the street with a low metallic groan. I remembered arriving home after midnight in 2021. The electricity had returned. My parents were in the kitchen. Tessa sat beside June on the sofa with a blanket around both of them. Margaret had told me the power went out while Tessa was buying batteries. Colin said the roads delayed her. Tessa cried when she described finding June frightened. June had not contradicted them. I had kissed her forehead and thanked my sister. I had thanked the person who left her. Why didn't you tell me when I got home? June looked toward the floor. Grandma talked to me before you came. What did she say? That Aunt Tessa was applying for a job at a youth center. I remembered that job. Tessa had wanted it badly. She had told us it would prove she was finally building a serious career. Grandma said if people thought Tessa left me, she wouldn't get hired. So they asked you to lie. She said I didn't need to lie. I only needed not to correct anyone. The sentence sounded like my mother. Margaret rarely told people to lie directly. She taught them that silence could be more loving than truth. What else did she say? That you would blame yourself and maybe stop working nights. June's voice weakened. She said we couldn't afford that. I turned from the window. You thought my job depended on you keeping quiet. I thought our house did. The guilt came so quickly that I could barely breathe around it. I had been struggling then. Michael had been gone 3 years. Hospital overtime paid for roof repairs, school expenses, and the parts of our life grief had made more expensive. June had watched every bill. My mother knew that. She had used it. June, you were 12. I know. You were not responsible for my job or our mortgage. I know now. You should never have been asked to protect Tessa. I know. You should never have been alone. I know. Each answer made my apology feel smaller. I returned to the table. Did you write the truth in the blue journal? Yes. And then in the school piece? Part of it. Why didn't your teacher contact me? I called it fiction. Of course she had. Fiction had been the only place where June was allowed to tell the truth without accusing anyone. We returned to Tessa's chapter. After the invented rescue, my sister wrote that the night changed her relationship with June. She claimed June began confiding in her, that she had become the adult who could hear what I missed. None of that had happened. Tessa had taken June shopping twice after the storm and asked questions about school. June had answered, because my mother told her Tessa was trying to make things right. Tessa had transformed forced proximity into trust. The most painful paragraph came near the end. She wrote that some mothers loved through provision rather than presence. She described me as hardworking, but emotionally distant. A woman who kept the lights on while failing to notice her daughter sitting in the dark. The sentence was elegant. It was also cruel. I had missed the truth. That part was undeniable. But Tessa had removed her own choice from the story and placed the moral failure entirely on me. She used me too, I said. June closed the chapter. She knew you would focus on that. What? The part where you were not there. I looked at her. She knew if you read it, you would feel guilty enough to stop asking what she did. June understood my sister better than I did. I wanted to send the entire chapter to Celeste with every copied line highlighted. I wanted to write to every person who had praised Tessa's podcast. I wanted to post the photograph of June's place card and tell the world what kind of woman wrote a book called Making Room while blocking a child from Christmas dinner. I opened a new email. June put her hand over the laptop. No. She turned you into a character. June kept her hand on the laptop. She turned herself into the person who saved you. Her fingers tightened. People are going to read this. Not if the publisher stops it. They need to know all of it. Why? So they understand. Who is they? I stopped. The publisher. They need the copied words and the wrong permission. They don't need every detail of what I was afraid of. Tessa already put those details in the book. That doesn't mean you get to send more. The words struck cleanly because they were true. I removed my hands from the keyboard. What do you want them to see? The school file. They have 1 page. The chapter she sent. They have not asked us to forward it yet. Then tell them we received it. What about what happened that night? I can write a statement. You should not have to do this alone. I'm not alone. That is not what I meant. I know. June sat back. I don't want you to make the whole story public, because you are angry. I won't. You almost did. Yes. She nodded once. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement that I had told the truth. Before we could decide what to send, Tessa emailed again. This message was shorter. Elena, I am willing to add June as a named contributor and include an acknowledgement that some language originated in her early writing. I can also allocate part of the book income to an education account for her. This is a generous solution. Please do not force the publisher into a position that hurts everyone. Tessa. A second message followed from Margaret. Your sister is trying to give June credit. Do not let pride destroy this opportunity. June read both messages. An education account, she said. It is a distraction. It could pay for college. We can find other ways to pay for college. You already work 16-hour shifts. That does not give them permission. But if the words are mine and my name is there, she did not finish. I understood what made the offer dangerous. For years, June had watched adults treat her feelings as problems and her silence as maturity. Now the same people were telling her that her words had value. They offered her money, credit, and a place in the book only after being caught. But to a 16-year-old who had just been told there was no room at the Christmas table, seeing her name printed beside Tessa's could feel like being invited back inside. Tessa did not offer this before the complaint, I said. She was going to publish without your name, and she still has not told us how she got the journal. June's jaw tightened. I heard you. Then why are you considering it? June's face hardened. Because they are my words. Exactly. So maybe I should get credit. Credit does not fix permission. I didn't say it did. You are talking about letting the book continue. I'm talking about thinking. There is nothing to think about. The moment the sentence left my mouth, I knew what I had done. June stood. Then why do you keep asking what I want? Because I want you involved. Involved is not the same as deciding. They manipulated you, and you are protecting me by telling me the answer before I choose it. I am trying to stop them from using you again. You are still talking like the story belongs to whoever is loudest. I rose too. That is not fair. Neither was making me prove they hurt me before you believed it. I had no response. June closed the laptop. I need space. June, please. She carried the laptop upstairs and shut her bedroom door. I remained at the table with Tessa's chapter open on the screen and her offer in my inbox. My first instinct was to follow June. My second was to reply to Tessa and refuse everything. I did neither. For once, I let my daughter have the silence she had asked for. An hour later, June came downstairs. Her face had been washed. She held a notebook that was not the missing blue one. I wrote the statement for the publisher, she said. Can I read it? Not yet. All right. She sat across from me. I don't want the book to tell that story the way she wrote it. I waited. But I don't know if I want nobody to ever read my words. You do not have to decide both things today. What if my name changes it? Changes what? How it feels. I could have told her no. I could have said stolen words remained stolen even with a name added later. But June was not asking for a verdict. She was trying to separate recognition from consent. I don't know, I said. She looked down at her hands. If they put my name on the chapter, does that mean it isn't stealing anymore? June's question stayed between us for the rest of the afternoon. If they put my name on the chapter, does that mean it isn't stealing anymore? I did not answer, because every answer I wanted to give would have made the decision for her. That evening, Tessa sent another email. She suggested we meet on New Year's Day, at a diner near the lake. She called it neutral ground. She promised there would be no publisher, no lawyer, and no recording. She said the family needed one calm conversation before strangers decided what our memories meant. I showed the email to June. You don't have to go, I said. I want to hear what she says when she has to look at me. You can leave at any point. So can you. Yes. And you won't answer for me? I hesitated long enough for her to notice. I will try not to. That isn't the same as promising. No, it isn't. June read the message again. I want to go. The diner was almost empty when we arrived shortly after 10 on New Year's morning. Snow had been pushed into gray piles along the parking lot. Inside, holiday garlands still hung above the windows, even though the music had already changed back to ordinary radio. Tessa had chosen a booth near the back. She sat beside Marcus. My parents occupied the opposite side. A leather folder rested in front of my sister. No one stood when June approached. Margaret smiled as though we had come for pancakes after church. "Sweetheart," she said, "come sit beside me." June chose a chair at the end of the table instead. I sat beside her. Tessa looked tired, but carefully tired. Her hair was pulled back and she wore almost no makeup. It was the face she used when she wanted people to see sacrifice before they heard the facts. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We came to listen," June replied. Tessa glanced at me. "That is all I'm asking." The server brought coffee for the adults and hot chocolate for June. Maeve was not with them. June noticed immediately. "Where is Maeve?" "At home," Marcus said. "She didn't need to be part of this." "She was at the dinner." Marcus looked down at his cup. Tessa opened the leather folder. "We are not here to relive Christmas Eve." "That is why we are here," June said. "We are here because your mother contacted my publisher before asking me a single question. She asked you where you got my words. You had already made an accusation. You sent me home before I could see the book." Margaret placed one hand on the table. "The situation at the door was handled poorly. You told me there was no room. There was a professional commitment underway. There was a folding chair." "Elena," Margaret said, turning toward me, "are you going to let her reduce all of this to furniture?" I felt June stiffen beside me. I kept my hands around my coffee. "She is answering for herself." Margaret's mouth tightened. Tessa slid identical copies of a document toward June and me. "This is a revised contributor agreement." June did not touch it. "What does it say?" "That you will be credited for the language that came from your early writing." "How much language?" "We are still reviewing that." "So you don't know?" "I know which passages were influenced by family materials." "That is not what I asked." Tessa drew a slow breath. "The agreement gives you contributor credit, a percentage of my net proceeds and an education fund." "How much?" Tessa named an amount. It was enough to sound meaningful to a 16-year-old, and small enough that it would not change our lives. Margaret leaned forward. "College is expensive, June. Your mother knows that better than anyone." I felt the old pressure enter the room. Money had always been my family's cleanest weapon. They never said I could not take care of June. They reminded me how much everything cost until accepting their help felt responsible. June opened the document. The first page described her as a contributing source. The second granted permission to use her name, image, personal history, written materials, and recorded statements in the book, audiobook, marketing campaign, and any future adaptation. The signature page required both June's name and mine. Tessa knew June's signature alone would not be enough. She had never said that in her emails. June read in silence. Marcus spoke for the first time. "This gives everyone protection." "Protection from what?" I asked. "From misunderstandings." "Who is being protected?" "Elena, please." "No, I want to know." Marcus rubbed his thumb against the handle of his cup. "Tessa showed me a signed release before the book went into production. I believed permission existed. A release for one podcast episode. I did not see the entire document." "Then you did not know what it allowed." "I know that now." Tessa turned toward him. "This is not helpful." "It is true." She looked back at June. "The important thing is that we can correct the language going forward." June flipped to the third page. Her finger stopped halfway down. "This says I voluntarily supplied journals and family writings for publication." Tessa leaned closer. "That is standard language. It is false. It can be adjusted." "Then why is it here?" "Because the lawyers drafted a broad version." "There are no lawyers here," I said. "The publisher's contract requires clear permissions. I had a release. They are now asking for more because of your complaint. You presented the release as broader than it was." I presented a signed document showing June had previously agreed to share her writing for one episode. That detail can be clarified. June looked up. Did you tell them it was only for one episode? Tessa did not answer immediately. Margaret stepped in. What matters is that no one was trying to harm you. June's eyes remained on Tessa. Did you tell them? I told them you had participated in my work before. That is not the same. It showed an existing relationship. You used one signature to make it look like I agreed to a book. That is an unfair interpretation. It is what happened. Margaret's voice softened. June, listen to me. Pain should not be wasted. June looked at her. What does that mean? It means difficult experiences can become something meaningful. Your writing could help girls who feel alone. My writing helped Aunt Tessa. It could help many people. Then why didn't she ask me? Because adults sometimes make decisions before children understand their value. The sentence entered the space between us so gently that anyone at another table might have mistaken it for wisdom. June stared at her grandmother. You decided I would agree, because you thought I should. We knew you would understand eventually. I saw June's hand tighten around the document. Tessa reached toward her. This is the chance to be recognized. Your name will be in the acknowledgments and on the chapter page. I am offering more than most authors would. You are offering me my own words. I am offering you a place in something larger. A place? Tessa seemed not to hear the danger in the word. Yes. June's face changed. She looked from my sister to my mother and then to the document. You told me there was no place for me at Christmas. That was one evening, Tessa said. And now there is a place for my name because the publisher asked questions. That is not fair. June pushed the document away. Tessa pushed it back. Read the full agreement before reacting. I read the part that says, I gave you things I never gave you. We can revise that sentence. Before or after I sign it. June, I said, do not sign anything inaccurate. Her head turned sharply toward me. I know. I am only saying that because they are pressuring you. I can tell. Tessa sat back. This is exactly what I meant. Elena, you are making it impossible for June to think independently. I am her mother, and you are speaking over her. I am stopping you from putting a false statement in front of her. June reached for the agreement again. I moved faster. I pulled it away from the table. The sound of paper sliding across laminate was small, but every face turned toward me. Enough, I said. She is not signing this. June stood. I knew immediately what I had done. June, you promised. I am not letting them trap you. You said I could decide. You were about to sign a lie. I was reading. They were pressuring you. So are you. The diner seemed suddenly too quiet. I lowered my voice. I am trying to protect you. Everyone keeps saying that while deciding what I am allowed to do. That is not the same. It feels the same. She took her coat from the back of the chair. June, sit down, Margaret said. June looked at her. No. Tessa folded her arms. You see what Elena is doing. She wants you angry. June did not answer her. She walked toward the front door. I followed. Outside, the wind cut across the parking lot. June stood beside our car with her hands shoved into her sleeves. I'm sorry, I said. You grabbed it away from me. I saw the false statement. So did I. I thought you were going to sign. I didn't even have a pen. You were listening to them. That was why we came. I stopped a few feet away. I was scared. I was scared too. I cannot let them take more from you. You can't stop that by taking the choice first. The words hurt because they were precise. I should have asked what you wanted to do. Yes. I should not have touched the document. No, I am sorry. June looked toward the diner windows. Through the glass, I could see Margaret speaking quickly while Tessa gathered the papers. Marcus remained still. I need a few minutes, June said. Do you want me to wait in the car? No. Do you want to walk? I want you not to follow me. The parking lot opened onto a public path along the street. There were people nearby and businesses open. All right. I'm not running away. I know. I will come back. I know. She walked toward the corner. I stood beside the car and watched until she disappeared behind the pharmacy sign. Then I forced myself to look away. Tessa came outside 5 minutes later. She is proving my point. What point? That you have made this about control. You wrote a false release. It is a draft. It says June voluntarily gave you her journals. Language gets revised. Facts do not become true because you plan to revise them later. Tessa folded her coat around herself. You have spent June's entire life deciding what is safest for her. And I have made mistakes. At least I am offering her credit. After she found out, I could have fought this. You are fighting it. No, I could have said the language was transformative and left it to lawyers. Instead, I am offering your daughter a future. You are offering her a reason to lie for you. Her expression hardened. You think you are better than all of us because you save people for a living. This has nothing to do with my job. It has everything to do with your job. You are always the exhausted hero, the widow, the nurse, the mother who sacrifices. You cannot stand that I created something people value. You created it with June's words. I created the structure, the message, and the meaning. You created a version where you rescued the child you left alone. Tessa's face lost color. I had not said it publicly. Only the four of us could hear. Still, she looked toward the diner, as if the walls might repeat it. You do not know what happened that night. June told me. June was 12. She remembers being alone. Memory is complicated. Not that complicated. Tessa stepped closer. If you destroy this contract, do not expect me to forgive you. You still think this is something I am doing to you. It is. She returned to the diner. June came back 12 minutes later. She opened the passenger door and sat without looking at me. I got behind the wheel. Do you want to go home? Yes. Do you want to talk? No. I drove. At home, June carried her copy of the broad release to her room. Tessa had placed it in front of her before the confrontation, and June had taken it when we left. I did not ask for it. That afternoon, an email arrived from the hospital education department. I had been accepted into a 6-week leadership cohort in Minneapolis, beginning in February. I had applied months earlier. The program required 3 overnight stays each week. Before Christmas, the arrangement had seemed manageable. June would remain in school, and my parents had agreed to be the emergency contacts if weather or hospital schedules delayed me. Now I could not leave June under their supervision. I searched for alternatives. Mrs. Brennan could help occasionally, but not 3 nights every week. My closest colleague worked rotating shifts. June was old enough to spend an evening alone, but after what had happened, I was not leaving her overnight for half the week while our relationship was still fractured. I called the coordinator. I need to defer, I said. We can move you to the next annual cohort. Next year? Yes. I looked toward the stairs. Please do that. The coordinator sounded disappointed but professional. She explained I would not need to reapply, only confirm availability the following fall. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the acceptance email. I did not tell June. I told myself she had enough to carry. The truth was more complicated. I was afraid she would see the program as something she had taken from me and sign Tessa's agreement to repay a debt I had created in silence. 2 days later, Tessa released a new podcast episode. She never used our names. She spoke about mothers who confused protection with ownership. She said some parents feared their children's voices when those voices no longer matched the family story. Listeners praised her courage. Several relatives shared the episode. A cousin sent it directly to June with the message, "I hope you think about this." June showed me. I wanted to respond publicly. I remembered what she had said about using her story to win. I closed the app. That evening, Marcus called. "Maeve wants to send June something," he said. "What? A message about Christmas Eve? Does Tessa know?" "No." "Then do not put Maeve in the middle without deciding what you are willing to stand behind." Marcus was silent. "I will be present when she sends it," he said. "I don't want Maeve learning that staying quiet is the safest choice." A few minutes later, June's phone vibrated. Maeve had written a short message. "Mom knew you were coming. She told Grandma before you arrived that nobody should let you into the dining room until the pictures were finished. She said you did not know about the book and might say something in front of Dana. I'm sorry I stayed inside." June read it twice. "She planned it," she said. "Yes. It wasn't because I arrived at the wrong time. No. It wasn't because there were too many people. No." June placed the phone down. She went upstairs and returned with the broad release. She opened it on the table and read from the beginning again. Her finger moved down each paragraph. I stayed on the opposite side of the room. When she reached the page describing her as having voluntarily supplied her journals for publication, she stopped. For a long moment, she stared at the signature line below it. Then she closed the document. "I wanted to sign so everyone would stop," she said. "I did not move. Not because I believe it. I know. I wanted Grandma to stop calling. I wanted Maeve not to hear them fight. I wanted you to sleep. That is not your responsibility. They keep making it feel like it is. I know." June looked at the agreement again. "If I sign this, they will say I gave them the journals." "Yes. And then Christmas becomes another thing they tell differently." "Yes." She pushed the document away. "I'm not signing a lie, just because they promised to fix the wording later." The message reached June before breakfast. A girl from her English class had sent a screenshot of Tessa's podcast episode with one question beneath it. "Is this about you?" June stood beside the kitchen counter holding her phone with both hands. She did not answer. A second message appeared. "My mom says your aunt is writing a book about your family." June turned the screen face down. "She never used my name," she said. "She used enough details for people to guess. Maeve told one friend about the book months ago. Maybe that's how. Or one of your relatives talked." "It doesn't matter how." Her voice was flat again, the same voice she had used after being sent home from Christmas dinner. "It matters." "No, Mom. It happened." She walked upstairs before I could stop myself from asking what she wanted me to do. I opened Tessa's podcast page. The new episode had accumulated hundreds of comments. Most listeners praised her for speaking about controlling parents. A few shared their own stories about mothers who would not allow their children to grow up. None of them knew June. None of them knew about the narrow release, the missing journal, or the place card pushed away from the Christmas table. I opened a social media post and began typing. "My sister is presenting herself as the victim while using my 16-year-old daughter's unpublished writing without permission." I attached Maeve's photograph. Then I opened the 2024 release. I took screenshots of the paragraphs limiting permission to one podcast episode. I added the chapter Tessa had sent and highlighted the sentences copied from June's schoolwork. My finger hovered over the button. I imagined the post spreading through every relative, listener, and publisher contact who had praised Tessa. For 1 second, it felt like justice. "What are you doing?" June stood at the bottom of the stairs. I turned the phone toward me. "Nothing yet. You were going to post it." I was writing a response. "With the release?" "Yes." "And my assignment?" "Only the copied lines." June came into the kitchen. "Delete it. They are making you look like someone I am controlling." "I know. They are telling people you agreed." "I know. Then people should see the truth." Which truth? The documents. They are still about me. They prove Tessa lied. They also show strangers what I wrote when I was 12. I would cover the private parts. You already read more than I wanted the publisher to see. I put the phone down. I did not send it. You were going to. I was angry. So was Aunt Tessa when she wrote her version. That is not the same. Why? Because your version is true? I opened my mouth and stopped. June folded her arms. If you post my assignment to prove she stole it, you are still using my writing to win. I am trying to protect your reputation. I didn't ask you to make my reputation public. The distinction should have been obvious. It was not obvious to me until she said it. Tessa believed that because her purpose was helpful, she could use June's pain. I had almost decided that because my purpose was protection, I could expose the same pain. The intention was different. The entitlement was not different enough. I deleted the draft. June watched until the screen cleared. What do you want us to say? I asked. Nothing about the journal. All right. Nothing about the night the power went out? All right. And do not post the chapter. What if people keep repeating Tessa's version? They probably will. You are willing to let that happen? I am not willing to show strangers everything, just to make them believe me. I looked at her. June had spent years wishing the adults in her family would believe her, without forcing her to display every wound. Now I was asking her to do exactly that for an audience. We can issue one short statement, I said, only if you approve it. What would it say? I typed slowly and read each sentence aloud. There is an active dispute about the use of writing created by a minor. The publisher is reviewing the source and scope of permission. We will not discuss the private content of a child's journals or schoolwork publicly. June considered it. Remove active. Why? It sounds like a lawsuit. There is no lawsuit. Exactly. I changed the first sentence. There is a dispute about the use of writing created by a minor. June nodded. That's enough. I posted the statement without photographs, excerpts, or accusations. Within minutes, relatives began asking what Tessa had used. I answered none of them. Around noon, Celeste emailed. The rights and permissions manager had begun reviewing Tessa's source documents. The publisher requested the complete release, the email in which it had originally been sent, and any documents showing the date June created the disputed material. I read the message to June. They already have the release, she said. They might have only what Tessa submitted. What did she submit? We don't know yet. Celeste's next paragraph answered the question. Tessa's project packet included an author permissions questionnaire describing a broad family story release. The only supporting attachment behind that entry was the scanned signature page. At the advanced copy stage, production had relied on Tessa's contractual warranty and had not yet compared that page with the complete release. The 2 pages limiting the agreement to 1 podcast episode were not in the project file. June stared at the email. She let them rely on the page with our names. That is what Celeste is saying. So the publisher thought we signed something bigger. Yes. Did Tessa cut the other pages off? We don't know whether she did it or someone else sent the page that way. You always say that. What? We don't know. I am trying not to accuse anyone of something we cannot prove. June looked away. I continued carefully. But the full document proves the signature page did not mean what Tessa told them it meant. That was enough for the moment. I forwarded the original 2024 email thread directly to the rights manager. The thread contained the full 3-page release and Tessa's own sentence, stating that it covered nothing beyond 1 podcast episode. June approved the attachment before I sent it. 2 hours later, Celeste confirmed receipt. She wrote that the difference between the complete document and the description in the project file raised serious questions. The publisher had asked Tessa to provide a complete source list and explain how she obtained the journal material. No one said the contract would be terminated. No one said June had won. But for the first time, Tessa's documents were being compared with her claims. My father called shortly after 4. I nearly let it go to voicemail. June was upstairs. I answered in the laundry room and closed the door. Elena, what do you want? I want to clear up one part before Tessa makes it worse. Put it in writing. I am calling my daughter. You are calling because the publisher asked where the files came from. He was silent. Did you scan June's journals? Some pages. How many? I don't remember. Which journals? Your mother brought me a box. That was not my question. I did not keep a catalog. Did you ask June? No. Did you ask me? They were family materials. They were private notebooks. I was preserving them. For whom? Your mother said Tessa needed several pages for background. When? Last year. Maybe earlier. Did you read them? Not closely. You scanned private writing without reading it? I scanned what Margaret marked. The sentence chilled me. What do you mean marked? She used slips of paper. So Mom selected pages. She knew what Tessa was looking for. And you sent them? Yes. How? Email. Do you still have the emails? I would have to check. Check. Elena, I am telling you the truth now. You are telling me the part Tessa is about to blame on you. His breathing changed. She is saying I gave her material without explaining where it came from. Did you? I told her they were June's notebooks. Then she knew. I assume she knew. Do not assume. What did you write? I don't remember the exact words. Find the email. My father lowered his voice. If I give you that, will you tell the publisher this was a family misunderstanding instead of deliberate misconduct? No, I am trying to help. You are trying to trade part of the truth for protection. I am not the author. You scanned it. I did not write the book. You made private pages available to the person who did. I did what your mother asked. That was a choice. For years, Colin had survived family conflicts by standing one step behind Margaret. He let her choose the direction, then claimed he had only followed. That distance had protected him from responsibility. It did not protect him from the front door where he had watched June hold a gift he refused to accept. What do you want from me? He asked. The original emails. And then the publisher decides what they mean for the book. What about the family? You should have asked that before sending June home. He ended the call. I stayed in the laundry room until my hands stopped shaking. When I returned to the kitchen, June was standing beside the table. How much did you hear? Enough. I was going to tell you. You were talking about the scans. Yes. Grandpa admitted it. He admitted scanning pages your grandmother selected. June sat down. So all 3 of them knew. At least all 3 knew the pages came from you. Did he say where the blue journal is? No. Did you ask? No. June looked at me in disbelief. I was focused on the email. That journal is mine. You are right. I should have asked. Call him back. He may not answer. Call. I did. Colin did not answer. I left one message. June wants to know where her blue journal is. She has the right to receive it back. A few minutes later, Colin texted that several storage boxes from the scanning project were still locked in the back room of his former print shop and that he would check them. June read the message without replying. Do you think it is there? She asked. I don't know. Or with Grandma? I don't know. She pressed both hands to her forehead. I hate that answer. So do I. Later that evening, I opened my hospital email to check my schedule. The message confirming my deferred leadership cohort was near the top of the inbox. I had not told June. I intended to close it before she entered the room. She appeared behind me with a glass of water. What did you defer? I turned too quickly. Nothing you need to worry about. Her expression changed. The words sounded like Tessa at the door. Nothing you need to worry about tonight. I closed my eyes. That was the wrong answer. What did you defer? A leadership program. The Minneapolis one? Yes. You got accepted? Yes. And you turned it down? I moved it to next year. Because of me. Because the arrangements we made are no longer safe. Because of me. No. You were going to stay in Minneapolis 3 nights a week. Yes. Grandma and Grandpa were supposed to be my emergency contacts. Yes. And now they aren't. That is their responsibility. But you lost the program. I postponed it. June set the glass down too hard. You should have told me. I did not want you to feel guilty. So you lied. I did not lie. You hid it. Yes, because you thought I might sign Tessa's release if I knew. I could not deny it. That was part of it. June laughed once, without humor. You keep saying you want me to decide, then you hide anything that might affect my decision. I was trying not to make my sacrifice your debt. You don't get to decide what information I can handle. No. You keep doing it. Yes. The word came out before I could soften it. June stopped. I stood from the desk. I kept explaining your discomfort instead of listening to it. She did not move. I signed Tessa's podcast release because I trusted her description more than I asked what you wanted. June looked down. When you said the episode felt wrong, I told you the language was probably changed enough. Her shoulders tightened. When you were nervous about Christmas, I told you not to let one comment ruin the holiday. You said I was too sensitive. I did. You said Aunt Tessa joked with everyone. She did not joke with everyone the same way. No, I should have believed the pattern before you could prove every detail. June's eyes filled, but she did not cry. I was trying to be fair, I said. But I kept asking the child to provide evidence while giving the adults explanations. She wiped one cheek with the back of her hand. I almost posted your writing today because I wanted to defeat Tessa. You deleted it. Only after you stopped me. June looked toward the dark laptop screen. I am sorry for every time I treated your silence as agreement. I am sorry I let my parents' version become the default version. I am sorry I decided what you needed to know about the leadership program. Are you going to keep apologizing until I tell you it's okay? No. The answer surprised her. You do not have to tell me it is okay. What happens now? I tell you the truth, even when I am afraid you will use it to sacrifice something for me. And if I make the wrong choice, I tell you what I think. I do not take the paper out of your hand. June sat in silence. Then she said, I'm still angry. You should be. I don't forgive you yet. I understand. I might later. That is yours to decide. She nodded once. The next morning, Celeste called. She explained that the publisher wanted to hear directly from June, but would not require her to participate. June had 3 options. She could provide a written statement, she could join a private video interview with me present, or she could decline, and the publisher would review the documents without questioning her. Celeste's voice came through the speaker. You do not have to discuss private details beyond the material you choose to identify, she said. You may stop the interview at any time. June looked at me. I kept my mouth closed. Can my mother be there? She asked. Yes. Will Aunt Tessa be there? No, we would interview her separately. Will it be recorded? We will take written notes. If any recording becomes necessary, we would ask first. June thought for several seconds. I want the private interview. Celeste scheduled it for the following week. After the call, June retrieved the printed copy of the hallway light from the folder we had made. She did not touch the empty place in the journal box. The paper in her hands came from the school email, not the missing notebook. She read the assignment from beginning to end. Then she used a yellow highlighter to mark 2 passages. The first described the moment Tessa left the house. The second described Colin arriving after the power had failed. Only those? I asked. Only those. They may ask for more. I can say no. Yes. June capped the highlighter. For years, my family had interpreted her silence as permission. Now she was preparing to speak. But this time she would choose the words, the audience, and the moment she stopped. June taped a sheet of paper to the wall above our kitchen table. At the top, she wrote 3 words. I can refuse. Beneath them, she made a list. I can refuse to answer questions about parts of the journal that are not in the book. I can refuse to describe how afraid I was. I can refuse to explain why I stayed quiet. I can end the interview. She read each sentence aloud as she wrote it. I sat across from her with the printed copy of The Hallway Light, Tessa's chapter, and the original podcast release arranged in separate folders. We should add that you can ask for a break, I said. June wrote it beneath the others. And you can ask them to repeat a question. She added that too. What if I don't remember something exactly? Then you say you don't remember? What if Aunt Tessa remembers it differently? That does not mean you have to replace your memory with hers. What if they think I'm lying because I don't remember every detail? I looked at the 2 passages she had highlighted. You were 12 years old and frightened. Memory is not a video recording. Not remembering the exact minute something happened does not make the parts you do remember false. But she wrote exact times. Tessa wrote a polished chapter 4 years later. She could say that makes her more reliable. She could. June frowned. That doesn't mean it is true, I added. We spent the morning separating what June knew from what she inferred. She knew Tessa had left after I went to work. She knew the power went out while she was alone. She knew she called Tessa and did not receive help. She knew Colin arrived before Tessa returned. She knew Margaret asked her not to correct the family's version. She did not know which party Tessa attended. She did not know exactly what Margaret told Colin before he drove over. She did not know when the family first decided to describe Tessa as the person who rescued her. Those distinctions mattered. For years, my family had treated confidence as proof. Margaret spoke in complete sentences. So everyone assumed she remembered events clearly. June hesitated, so they treated her uncertainty as weakness. I was beginning to understand that hesitation could be honesty. Around noon, a vehicle pulled into our driveway. June saw it first. That's Uncle Marcus. I looked through the window. Marcus stepped out of his SUV carrying a large cardboard box. He did not approach the keypad. He rang the bell and waited outside. I opened the door, but left the storm door closed. What is that? Journals, he said. Margaret asked me to bring them. Why didn't she bring them herself? She thought you wouldn't open the door. She was right. Marcus shifted the box against his hip. Tessa does not know I'm here. Then why are you here? Because these belong to June. I opened the storm door and took the box. Is everything in it? I don't know. You did not check? They were sealed when Margaret gave them to me. June appeared behind me. Marcus looked past my shoulder. Maeve says hello. June did not answer. Marcus lowered his voice. She also wants you to know she is not angry. Why would she be angry? June asked. Tessa told her the book might be canceled because of what happened. That isn't what I asked. Marcus nodded once. No, it isn't. He placed an envelope on top of the box. This came with it. From Margaret? I asked. Yes. Did you read it? No. I believed him only because he looked more tired than defensive. Before leaving, Marcus said, I should have opened the door on Christmas Eve. June looked at him. Yes. He accepted the answer without asking for forgiveness. After his car left, June and I carried the box to the kitchen. The tape looked new. Margaret's handwriting covered one side. June's writing. Handle carefully. The label made me angrier than if she had written nothing. June cut the tape. Inside were 7 journals, 2 school notebooks, a folder of poems, and a binder containing copies of essays. She lifted each one out and placed it on the table in order. 2019, 2020. A red notebook with no date. 2022. 2023. 2024. The blue journal from 2021 was not there. June checked the box again, as though it might be hidden beneath the cardboard flaps. It's missing. I see that. She sent everything except the one we asked for. I opened Margaret's envelope. The letter was 4 pages long. My mother began by saying she had always admired June's writing. She described herself as the first person who recognized June had a gift. She said she had saved the notebooks because young people often destroyed work they later wished they had kept. She called her actions preservation. She called the journals a family archive. She said Tessa had used the material because she believed June's voice deserved a larger audience. Near the end, Margaret wrote that changing identifying details made the work ethically acceptable. I handed the letter to June. She read silently. She still thinks changing my name fixes it. Yes. She says she protected my writing. She protected access to it. June placed the letter beside the empty space where the blue journal should have been. She didn't protect me. No answer could improve that sentence. We photographed the contents of the box and wrote down what had been returned. I emailed Margaret one question. Where is June's blue journal from 2021? Her reply came 10 minutes later. I returned everything Marcus collected. That was not an answer. Before I could respond, Tessa called. June saw the name and said, "Put it on speaker." "You do not have to speak to her. I want to hear what she offers now," I answered. Tessa skipped any greeting. "Did Marcus bring the box?" "Yes." "He should not have done that without speaking to me. They belong to June. I am not disputing the physical notebooks. I am offering to remove the night I brought her home before the publisher makes a permanent decision." June leaned closer to the phone. "What about the other chapters?" "The other references are brief." "How many?" "We are still identifying them." "You wrote the book," Tessa exhaled. "I would have to compare every draft." "Then you cannot tell me they are brief." Tessa tried to redirect the conversation to me, but I told her June had asked the question. Under pressure, she admitted she had several phrases and memories from scans Colin sent, that she knew the pages were June's, and that the publisher had instructed her not to delete the source files during the review. "So you still have my pages," June said. "I am offering to remove the chapter that concerns you most, and keep the rest of the book using an amount of my writing you cannot name." Tessa's voice sharpened. She said stopping the contract would affect their mortgage, Maeve's school, and commitments made against the advance. June closed her eyes, then opened them. "Did Maeve ask you to use her to make me sign?" "I am not using anyone." "Then do not say her name again." Tessa withdrew the informal offer and said everything else could go through the publisher. "That is where it should have gone from the beginning," I said. She ended the call. June remained at the table. Her hands trembled slightly. "Do you want a break?" I asked. "Yes." She went upstairs. 15 minutes later, her phone rang on the kitchen counter. She had left it charging beside me. Maeve's name appeared. I carried the phone to the foot of the stairs. "June, Maeve is calling." June came down and answered. She did not put the call on speaker, but she remained in the kitchen. I could hear only her side. "No, I'm not mad at you." A pause. "She said the school thing to me too." Another pause. "No, I'm not signing because of you." June listened for almost a minute. Then she said, "You don't have to fix your mom." When the call ended, she placed the phone down. "Maeve said she doesn't want me to sign for her." "Did Tessa tell her what would happen?" "She said they might have to move, and it would be because the book was stopped." I felt anger rise again. "Maeve is 13. "I know. So, are you supposed to protect her now?" June shook her head. "Uncle Marcus was there. He told Maeve she could call me. That mattered. Marcus had not removed himself from responsibility. He had at least stopped Tessa from using their daughter without resistance. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from Colin. The subject line said "Original Correspondence." I opened it with June beside me. The first attachment was a forwarded email from Margaret to Colin, dated 11 months earlier. Colin, please scan the pages marked with yellow slips. Choose the pages that show how Tessa brought her back to us after that terrible winter. Tessa needs them for background, and June is too young to understand how important this may become. Do not send the whole notebooks. Only the useful sections. Margaret. June read the final sentence again. Only the useful sections. They were choosing evidence for a conclusion they already wanted. They didn't even want my whole version. No, they wanted the parts they could change. The second attachment was Colin's original email to Tessa. Attached are the scans your mother selected. These are from June's notebooks and school materials. Margaret says they contain the strongest language for the winter chapter. There was no ambiguity. Tessa knew whose writing she received. The third attachment was a statement Colin had written that morning. He admitted scanning the pages and sending them to Tessa, without asking June or me. He said Margaret told him the publisher required family background. He admitted he understood the notebooks were private, but believed Tessa would seek permission before publication. He also admitted that on Christmas Eve, he knew June had been asked to remain outside until the author photographs were finished. His statement ended with a request. I would like the opportunity to speak directly with June and explain my role. June closed the document. No. You do not want to speak to him? No. Do you want me to tell him? Yes. Do you want the publisher to receive the email and statement? She read both again. The email, yes. And his statement? The part about scanning. What about Christmas Eve? Yes. His request to meet? No. I replied to Colin. June does not consent to a meeting. She has authorized us to provide the source email and the factual portions of your statement to the publisher. Do not contact her directly. His response came almost immediately. I understand. No apology. New argument. Perhaps he had finally realized that understanding a boundary did not require being invited past it. Tessa learned about Colin's email before the evening ended. She sent me one message. Dad is betraying his own family to protect himself. I read it aloud to June. Isn't that what she's doing? June asked. Yes. Margaret blamed Tessa for submitting the incomplete release. Tessa blamed Colin for sending the scans. Colin blamed Margaret for choosing the pages. Marcus said he had trusted the documents Tessa showed him. Every adult in that house had made a choice. Now that the consequences had reached them, each one was trying to become the person who had merely believed someone else. Their family story was collapsing because none of them wanted to remain inside it once responsibility arrived. That night, June sat on the stairs while I locked the front door. I don't want the first time I say no to them to be in an interview with strangers, she said. What do you want? I want to tell them before the publisher decides. All of them? Yes. Together? Yes. Are you sure? No. That was honest. What would you say? That I'm not signing. You already told Tessa. I want Grandma and Grandpa to hear it from me. Marcus too? He was at the door. I nodded. What kind of meeting? Somewhere I can leave. Not their house. No. Not ours. No. I called Marcus. He listened without interrupting. There is a small meeting room at the Lakeside Community Center, he said. I can reserve it. This is not mediation, I told him. I understand. No lawyer, publisher, or publicist. Agreed. No recording. I'll tell everyone. June decides when it ends. There was a pause. I'll make that clear. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. The night before, June could not settle. She walked from her bedroom to the kitchen 3 times, drank half a glass of water and returned upstairs. Finally, she put on her coat. I need to walk around the block. I'll come. I want to go alone. It was already dark, but the sidewalks were clear, and she had her phone. I'll leave the porch light on, I said. June looked through the front window. It was off when I came home on Christmas. I know. The house looked like nobody expected me. I expected you, I just wasn't here. That isn't the same as leaving the light. No. I switched it on before she opened the door. June walked slowly down the sidewalk. I watched until she turned the corner, then stepped away from the window. I did not follow. I did not call. I did not decide that my fear gave me the right to override what she had asked. 12 minutes later, the lock turned. June stepped inside beneath the porch light. She removed her coat and stood in the entryway. I don't want a seat at their old table anymore, she said. I waited. I kept thinking that if they apologized, maybe I would want to go back. You don't? No. What do you want? I want them to stop saying I gave them my story. Her voice was quiet, not uncertain. Quiet. She went to the kitchen table and picked up the 2 printed documents. Her school assignment, Tessa's chapter. She placed them side by side. Tomorrow, June said, I'm going to read both versions. The meeting room at the Lakeside Community Center contained 1 rectangular table, 6 plastic chairs, and a wall clock that ticked loudly enough to fill every silence. June chose the chair nearest the door. I sat beside her. Tessa and Marcus took the opposite side. Margaret sat at the head of the table, as though someone had placed her in charge. Colin remained at the far end, his hands folded over the statement he had already sent us. No one had brought coffee, gifts, or food. There was nothing on the table except June's school assignment, Tessa's chapter, and the broad release she had refused to sign. Marcus closed the door. Before we start, he said, June decides when the meeting ends. Margaret looked at him. We are all adults here. June isn't, Marcus replied. That is part of why we are here. Tessa turned toward him. You agreed this would not become an attack. I agreed to reserve the room. June placed one hand on the first page of her assignment. I want to speak before anyone explains anything. Margaret leaned back. All right, sweetheart. June did not correct the word. She read the passage describing the moment Tessa left our house in December 2021. In the piece, the character heard an adult's car start outside. She stood behind the curtain and watched the taillights disappear through the snow. The adult had promised to remain until the child's mother returned. June's voice shook once. She stopped, took a breath, and continued. When she finished, she placed the paper down. Then she opened Tessa's chapter. She read the corresponding section. In Tessa's version, she left only after the electricity failed. She drove through dangerous roads to obtain batteries and blankets. She returned to find June alone in the hallway and brought her back into the warmth. The same image appeared in both pieces. The weak flashlight, the upstairs hallway, the cold moving through the house, one room at a time. But the person who left had become the person who returned. June looked across the table. These are my sentences. Tessa folded her arms. They are not identical. Some are. Memoir uses compressed language. June picked up the 2 pages. This sentence is identical. She read it from the school assignment, then from the chapter. I learned to sit so quietly that even fear forgot I was there. No one spoke. June continued. This one is almost the same. She read the description of the fading flashlight. Then she pointed to the paragraph where Tessa found her. That part didn't happen. Tessa's voice remained controlled. I never claimed the chapter was a transcript. You claimed you came back for me. I did come back. After Grandpa called you. That is not how I remember it. You weren't there when the power went out. The timing was chaotic. You left before 7. I left briefly. You were gone for hours. Margaret lifted one hand. This is exactly why family memories should not be treated like evidence in a courtroom. This is not a courtroom, June said. Then stop speaking as though only one person is allowed to remember. You can remember anything you want. You cannot use my words to make your version sound like mine. Margaret's mouth tightened. June turned to her grandmother. You told me not to correct anyone. I told you we did not need to destroy Tessa's future over one bad decision. I was 12, and you were safe by the end of the evening. You didn't know that when you told me to stay quiet. Colin looked down. Margaret's voice softened. We were trying to protect the family. Which person in the family? Everyone. No, you protected Aunt Tessa's job. Tessa had worked very hard for that opportunity. So I had to lie because she worked hard? You were a child. We made the decision we thought would cause the least harm. June touched the broad release. You keep saying that. You keep deciding I would agree if I understood your reason. Margaret looked at me. Elena, this has gone far enough. I did not answer. June had asked to speak for herself. Margaret turned back to her. You were not denied anything permanent. You went home for one evening. Your aunt used language that reflected a shared experience. Now an entire contract is in danger. I didn't share the experience with her. She left. Tessa pushed her chair back slightly. I made a mistake that night. It was the first time she had said it directly. June waited. Tessa continued. I was young. I believed I could leave for an hour and return before anything happened. You didn't return before anything happened. No. Then why did you write that you did? Because the chapter is about emotional truth. What emotional truth? That I became more present in your life afterward. You didn't. I tried. You used my writing in a podcast, and when I said it felt strange, everyone told me I should be proud. That episode reached people. June looked at the broad release again. You keep talking about the people you reached. You never talk about what you took. Tessa's expression changed. You think books are created without sacrifice? Whose sacrifice? My work, my time, my family's stability. You mean Maeve. Maeve is part of my family. So am I. Tessa looked away. June said, You had room for my sentences. The room became completely still. You had room for my fear. You had room for the night I was alone. You had room for my name once the publisher asked questions. Her voice lowered. But when I came to the door, you didn't have room for me. Margaret pressed her lips together. Colin removed his glasses. Marcus stared at the table. Tessa spoke carefully. I am offering to correct that. No, you are offering to print my name beside a story that still makes you the person who saved me. We can revise the chapter. I don't want the chapter. We can remove the copied language. I don't want you using the rest of the journal either. There are only limited references. You still won't tell me how many. Because I would need to compare drafts. Then compare them without publishing. Tessa's patience broke. You do not understand what you are asking. I am asking you not to use my writing. You are asking a publisher to cancel a book that took me a year to build. June looked at her. You built it on pages you knew were mine. Your grandfather sent them. Colin raised his head. I told you they were June's notebooks. I believed permission would be handled. You told the publisher permission already existed. I showed them a signed release. You showed them one page, I said. Tessa turned toward me. You said June was speaking. She is. I am correcting a fact about the document I signed. Margaret placed her palm on the table. The release showed participation. It showed permission for one podcast episode, June said. It showed you had trusted Tessa with your writing before. I didn't trust her. Mom did. The sentence struck both of us. June glanced at me. I did not defend myself. She is right, I said. I trusted Tessa's explanation. June told me afterward that it felt wrong. and I minimized it. Margaret looked almost offended. You are encouraging her to rewrite her relationship with all of us. No, June said. I am finally allowed to describe it without one of you correcting me. Colin unfolded his statement. I scanned the pages. June looked at him. I know. I should have asked you. Yes. I believed your grandmother had discussed it with Elena. You never checked. No. And at Christmas, you knew they didn't want me to see the book. Colin swallowed. Yes. You told me to drive home. Yes. Why? He looked toward Tessa, then Margaret. I did not want the evening to become a confrontation. So you sent me away to protect everyone else from a conversation. Yes. There was no excuse in his answer. That did not make the answer better. Marcus spoke next. I should have opened the door. June turned toward him. You were standing there. I know. You let Aunt Tessa put her hand on Maeve so she couldn't come outside. I know. Why? I thought the photographs would take 20 minutes, and everyone could talk later. I had already been told to leave. Yes, you watched. Yes. Marcus did not ask her to understand. Tessa looked around the table. This has become a public confession. No, June said. It is a family meeting in a rented room. You are enjoying this. June stared at her. I moved, but June placed one hand on my arm. No, she said to Tessa. I hate this. Her voice cracked. I hate reading something I wrote when I was scared. I hate that Mom knows what really happened, because you put the wrong version in a book. I hate that Maeve thinks her home might disappear if I say no. That was never your responsibility. You told me it would affect her. I told you consequences are real. Then these are yours. Tessa leaned forward. Let me put your name on the chapter. June shook her head. Contributor credit, a percentage, the education account. We can rewrite every section together. No. This is your chance to control how the story is told. I already control my answer. June, think carefully. I have. You could turn this into something meaningful. It was meaningful before you took it. Tessa's face hardened. You are taking my future because you are angry about the past. June placed both documents into her folder. You built that future with my words. She stood. The wall clock showed 43 minutes had passed. I'm done. Margaret rose halfway. We have not discussed reconciliation. I didn't come for reconciliation. You cannot cut off your grandparents over one Christmas. It wasn't one Christmas. June picked up her coat. It was every time you decided silence meant yes. She walked to the door. I stood and followed her. Behind us, Tessa said my name. I stopped but did not turn. You wanted this, she said. No, you have always wanted June to choose you over us. I looked back. She is not choosing between people. She is choosing what happens to her own words. Then I left. The next morning, June and I sat side by side at the kitchen table for the private video interview. Celeste appeared first. A rights and permissions manager named Ellen Shaw joined her, followed by outside counsel for North Shore House. They introduced themselves and explained their roles. No one called the meeting a hearing. No one asked June to swear an oath. Ellen told her she could stop at any time. June held the sheet from our wall beside her laptop. I can refuse. The first questions were simple. Did she write The Hallway Light? Yes. When? December 2021. How had it been submitted? Through her school email to her English teacher. Had she given Tessa permission to use it in a memoir? No. Had she given anyone permission to scan her journals? No. Had she signed the 2024 release? Yes. What did she understand it to cover? One short excerpt in one podcast episode. Had she supplied journals for publication? No. Had she signed the updated contributor agreement? No. Ellen asked whether June recognized specific passages in the chapter. June read the 2 sections she had selected. She did not describe every detail of the night. She did not answer questions about pages unrelated to the book. When outside counsel asked whether the family disagreed about what happened in 2021, June said yes. Then she added, "They are allowed to remember it differently. They are not allowed to use my exact sentences to make their version sound like mine." Outside counsel wrote something down. No one interrupted her. "I confirmed that Michael had died in 2018 and that I was June's sole legal guardian. I confirmed I had signed only the limited podcast release. I described receiving the chapter and broad agreement from Tessa after the complaint." The interview lasted less than an hour. Tessa was interviewed separately. We did not see her answers. For 5 days, nothing happened. The silence was difficult, but it was different from the silences June had been forced to keep. This one belonged to a process. On January 21st, Celeste called. June asked to hear the decision with me. Celeste said North Shore House had completed its review of the project files, source materials, and permission documents. She spoke carefully. The publisher was not deciding which family member owned the memory of the 2021 event. It had found that the manuscript contained unpublished language created by June without adequate permission. The project file had described the 2024 release more broadly than its actual terms. The manuscript's source disclosures were incomplete. The nonfiction account also presented accuracy risks the publisher could not resolve. North Shore House had terminated the publishing agreement under its permissions, representations, and warranties provisions. The final print run would not proceed. The audiobook and promotional campaign were canceled. Advance copies already distributed for internal review could not all be physically recovered. Recipients would be told that the project had been withdrawn and asked not to quote or promote it, though the publisher could not guarantee every copy would be recovered. Tessa would have to address any unearned portion of her advance under her contract. Celeste did not call that punishment. She called it the consequence of a project the publisher could no longer support. After the call, June sat with both hands around a glass of water. "It's over? The contract is. The podcast?" Celeste said the distributor is reviewing 3 episodes. June nodded. She did not celebrate. Neither did I. That evening, Tessa sent one text. "June took my future." I showed it to my daughter. "Are you going to answer?" she asked. "No." "Because you don't know what to say?" "I know exactly what I want to say." "Then why not?" "Because every answer gives her another place to perform the same story." June looked at the message again. Then she deleted it from her phone. "Is staying quiet still what Grandma taught us?" she asked. "No. What is it now?" "This time, silence means we are not giving Tessa another stage." Canceling the contract did not make June sleep through the night. For the first week after North Shore House withdrew the book, she still checked the front lock twice before bed. She kept her phone face down during dinner because every vibration made her think another relative had decided to explain why Tessa deserved forgiveness. I expected relief to arrive as something visible. A deep breath, a laugh, a morning when June came downstairs without looking tired. Instead, relief came in smaller forms. She stopped carrying the broad release from room to room. She returned the hallway light to its folder. She left her bedroom door open while she studied. The book was no longer moving toward publication. That did not mean the words had returned to where they belonged. 3 days after the contract ended, Tessa released a statement on her podcast page. She wrote that she regretted the pain caused by the different ways family members remembered shared experiences and said she was learning to listen more carefully to people who felt unseen. She did not mention June, the incomplete release, or the scans identified as June's notebooks. She described the termination as a mutual decision while she reconsidered the best format for her work. That was not true. North Shore House had terminated the agreement, but Tessa was already polishing the consequence into another version she could control. Her statement drew local attention. A reporter emailed asking whether June and I would discuss children's privacy and creative nonfiction, and a regional radio producer called the hospital the next day. I declined both. When the producer said we could help other families, I answered, "That is what my sister said." She did not call again. Some listeners praised Tessa's humility. Others blamed cancel culture, or asked whether the book would be self-published. June read the statement once. "What do you think?" I asked. She apologized to people who felt hurt. Yes. She didn't apologize for what she did. No. June closed the page. "I don't want to answer." "You don't have to." That was the last time she searched Tessa's name for months. Margaret's first letter arrived 2 days later. It was addressed only to June. I placed it unopened on the kitchen table. "You decide," I said. June turned the envelope over. My mother had written "Sweetheart" beneath the return address. June pushed it toward me. "You read it first. Are you sure?" "Yes." The letter began with Christmas Eve. Margaret wrote that she regretted using words that sounded harsher than she intended. She explained that the house had been crowded, the photographer had limited time, and Tessa had been under extraordinary pressure. She said she wished June had waited in the living room instead of leaving. The sentence made me stop. June had asked to wait in the living room. Margaret had refused. Even in an apology, my mother was turning June's exclusion into a choice she had made herself. The rest of the letter focused on love. Margaret wrote that every decision had been motivated by a desire to preserve the family and support June's gift. She said she hoped June would someday understand that adults sometimes made imperfect choices for good reasons. I returned the letter to the envelope. "What does it say?" June asked. "It explains why she believes her intentions should matter more than what she did." "Does she admit she chose the pages?" "No." "Does she say she was wrong to tell me there was no room?" "She says the words sounded harsher than she intended." June stared at the envelope. "Send it back." "I did. I did not add a note." A second letter arrived a week later. This one was addressed to both of us. Margaret wrote that she was sorry for failing to anticipate how the book would affect June. She said she had believed credit and financial compensation would resolve the misunderstanding. She still did not admit she had no right to choose for June. We returned that letter too. The third envelope remained unopened. June placed it in a drawer and said she would decide later. I did not remind her it was there. Colin did not write immediately. For almost 2 weeks, he sent nothing. Then Marcus called. "I have something that belongs to June," he said. "What?" "A notebook." My hand tightened around the phone. "What color?" "Blue." "Where did you get it?" "Colin brought it to my office." "Why didn't he bring it here?" "He said he did not want to arrive without permission." That was the first boundary my father had respected without trying to negotiate it. "Is it sealed?" "Yes." "Did you open it?" "No." "Did Tessa?" "I don't know what happened before Colin gave it to me. The box is sealed now." I asked June whether she wanted Marcus to bring it. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time before answering. "Yes." "Do you want Colin to come?" "No." "Do you want Marcus inside?" "No." Marcus arrived the next afternoon. He placed a small cardboard box on the porch and stepped back. The porch light was already on, even though the sun had not yet set. June opened the door. Marcus looked at her. "Your grandfather included a statement." "Is it inside?" "Yes." "Thank you for bringing it." He nodded. "Maeve misses you." "I miss her too. She wants to know if she can call this weekend." June looked at me, then back at Marcus. "If you know she is calling." "I will." "And if Aunt Tessa doesn't listen?" Marcus hesitated. "I can make sure Maeve has privacy." June accepted that answer. Marcus returned to his car. We carried the box to the kitchen. The tape was intact. June cut it carefully and lifted the flaps. The blue journal lay inside a clear plastic sleeve. Beneath it was Colin's statement. June did not touch the journal at first. She looked at the worn cloth cover, the bent corner, and the faded strip of silver tape along the spine. "That's it," she said. "You are sure?" I put the tape there after the cover split. She removed the journal from the sleeve. Several yellow paper slips still marked pages near the middle. Margaret's handwriting appeared on one of them. Strong line about Tessa returning. June pulled the slip out and placed it on the table. She opened the journal just far enough to check the first page and several entries near December 2021. The December entries appeared intact. The sentence from the epigraph was there. The hallway passage was there. So were private pages the publisher had never seen and would never see. June closed the journal. Colin's statement was 2 pages long. He wrote that he had found the notebook in a file box at the back of his former print shop. Margaret had left the box there after he scanned the selected pages. He admitted he knew the notebook belonged to June and had failed to return it because the project was still being developed. He did not say he had forgotten. He did not say he believed permission existed. He wrote that preserving a document did not give him the right to decide who could use it. He admitted that on Christmas Eve, he chose to protect Tessa's photo session rather than his granddaughter. He wrote that June owed him no meeting, forgiveness, or response. The final sentence said only that he was returning what he should never have kept. June read the statement twice. "Do you believe him?" I asked. "I believe he knows what he did now. That is not the same as trusting him." "No. Do you want to write back?" "Not yet." June carried the journal upstairs. An hour later, she came down holding a small metal lockbox Michael had once used for tax documents. "Can we change the lock?" "Yes. We bought a new lock that evening." June chose the combination and did not tell me. I did not ask. The journal went into the box. For the first time since Christmas Eve, June knew exactly where it was and who could open it. The emergency plan took longer to rebuild. My parents had been listed on school forms, hospital contact sheets, and the security application for our home. Removing their names was simple. Replacing what they had represented was harder. I asked a colleague named Priya whether she could serve as a backup contact if June could not reach me during a shift. Priya agreed, but I made clear that June would decide when to call. Mrs. Brennan agreed to keep a spare house key in a sealed envelope for emergencies. The envelope remained in her locked desk. June and I created a check-in system for long shifts. One message when she reached home, one after dinner, one before bed. If she did not respond within 30 minutes, I would call. If I could not leave the hospital, Priya or Mrs. Brennan would check, only after June knew who was coming. The plan did not assume that June was helpless. It also did not confuse independence with abandonment. The hospital leadership coordinator contacted me in September. The next cohort would begin in February 2027. My deferred place was still available. I showed June the email before replying. "Do you want to do it?" she asked. "Yes." "Then say yes. It still means 3 nights a week in Minneapolis. For 6 weeks. Yes. We have Priya now. And Mrs. Brennan. And I'll be 17. You will." June looked at me. "You don't have to postpone everything until I leave home." "I know." "Do you?" "I am learning." I accepted the place. June did not thank me. I was glad she did not. My career was not a gift she had to repay. Marcus kept his promise about Maeve. The girls began with short phone calls on Sunday afternoons. Tessa did not join them. Marcus remained nearby but gave Maeve privacy. In spring, June and Maeve met at a cafe with Marcus at another table. I waited in my car until June texted that she was ready to leave. They did not discuss the publisher every time. They talked about school, music, and a teacher Maeve disliked. Their relationship did not need to become evidence that the family had healed. It was simply a relationship they were allowed to define for themselves. I did not see Margaret, Colin, or Tessa that year. There were no dramatic confrontations. No one stood on our lawn begging. No judge ordered anyone to apologize. Distance became ordinary. At first, every holiday without my parents felt like an emergency. Then birthdays passed. Summer arrived. June began her senior year. Life continued without the people who had taught us that leaving them would destroy it. On Christmas Eve 2026, I did not volunteer for a double shift. I worked until 3 in the afternoon and came home before dark. June had invited her friend Sophie, whose father was deployed overseas. I invited Priya, who had planned to eat alone after her shift. There were no formal place cards. June set 4 plates around the table and placed an extra stack on the kitchen counter. "Why extra plates?" I asked. "In case Mrs. Brennan comes over. Did you invite her?" She said maybe. I opened the hallway closet. The folding chair remained inside. June saw me looking at it. "We can bring it out now," she said. "No one is coming yet." "That's not the point." Together we unfolded it and placed it near the table. Not because we expected a crowd, because making room did not begin after someone arrived. At 5, Maeve sent a video message. Marcus appeared briefly behind her and waved. Maeve wished us Merry Christmas and held up a bracelet June had mailed her. Tessa did not appear. June replied with a short video from the kitchen. She did not hide where she was or who was at the table. She also did not perform forgiveness. When the sky darkened, I switched on the porch light. Its glow spread across the steps and reached the edge of the sidewalk. A car stopped near the mailbox. The driver placed an envelope inside and left before I could see who it was. June brought it in. Margaret's handwriting covered the front. She turned it over. "Do you want me to read it?" I asked. "Not tonight." "Where should we put it?" June placed the envelope on the bookshelf. "I might read it someday." "You might. I might not." "That is yours." Priya arrived carrying soup. Sophie brought cookies. Mrs. Brennan appeared 20 minutes later with a bowl of potatoes and stayed for dinner. No one asked why June had not reconciled with her grandparents. No one asked her to turn pain into a lesson. No one asked to read the journal. After dinner, June took a new notebook from beneath the Christmas tree. I had chosen one with a plain brown cover and no lock. I had worried that buying her another journal might feel like pressure. She opened it at the table. "What are you going to write?" Sophie asked. "I don't know yet." June looked at the blank first page. For a moment, I expected her to write about Christmas Eve, Tessa, or the Blue Journal. Instead, she wrote 3 lines about the way snow reflected the porch light. She read them once, then closed the notebook. "That's all?" I asked. "For tonight." Later, after everyone left, June stood with me at the front window. The folding chair remained beside the table. The unopened envelope remained on the bookshelf. The porch light remained on. June rested her head against my shoulder. "In this house," she said, "nobody has to tell a prettier version of themselves to be allowed inside." I put my arm around her. Outside, snow moved through the light in slow white lines. For most of my life, I had believed home was the place where people shared a name, a history, and a table. I had been wrong. A table could exclude someone. A family story could erase the person who lived it. A locked door could protect as easily as it could reject. Home was not proven by how loudly people claimed to love us. It was proven by whether the person returning could see the light before reaching the door. That Christmas, I finally understood that home was not the table that claimed to love us. It was the light we chose to leave on for each other.